understand that, ranking member. Hope you can understand me. I have a really severe something. Just had a COVID test, but they don't think it's COVID, but we'll find out. The committee will come to order, and I ask unanimous consent that the chair be authorized to declare a recess at any time during today's hearing without objection. So ordered. As a reminder, please keep your microphone muted unless speaking. Should I hear any inadvertent background noise, I'll request a member please mute their microphone. To insert a document into the record, please email it to documentstni@mail.us.gov. I'm going to abbreviate my opening statement. I will put the full statement in the record, given the fact that you probably can't hardly understand me and I'm having trouble. This is the second hearing. Last hearing was industry stakeholders, and we heard distressing and serious gaps, lack of shortages of cyber personnel, lack of even the most basic hygiene practices, and a consensus among our witnesses that the federal government needed to help the private sector, which owns and operates 85% of the nation's critical infrastructure, to defend itself from and respond to attacks. The bill 3684 will provide funding at the local, state, and federal level to enhance the nation's cyber resilience and response to cybersecurity incidents. It improves the National Highway System, other public transportation systems, cybersecurity preparedness capabilities, empowers newly established Office of National Cyber Director, the President's principal advisor on cybersecurity policy and strategy, to identify cybersecurity incidents and coordinate a federal response. Those are noteworthy steps, but there's more to do. Today, we'll hear from federal agencies responsible for transportation, other critical infrastructure, and their efforts to help private industry. We have, for the most part, relied upon voluntary approach to protecting assets, choosing not to mandate standards for cybersecurity audits or exercises. In contrast, in other areas where the private sector assets have potential to cause significant harm, the government has established very robust requirements that would be nuclear power, aviation, drinking water, and wastewater, and others to make them safer and more resilient. But, there are many of these industries relate to other critical industries, the private sector, and voluntary cooperation sometimes isn't enough. You have to spend a bunch of money on cybersecurity. The leeches on Wall Street are going to say, hey, why are you spending all that money on cybersecurity? It's driving down your stock price. We want to see you just, put the money in the bank. So there needs to be a little nudging here. And then, of course, the cost of an incident far exceeds the investment they should have and would have made to prevent that incident, absent an absolutely catastrophic incident. But more basic incidents or ransomware and all the other things that are rather routine. So, I don't think that implementing basic cybersecurity standards, reporting requirements, and cybersecurity awareness training should be voluntary. It should be required, and public safety, nation security depend upon these steps. In the wake of the Colonial Pipeline cyber attack, the Transportation Security Administration mandated specific cybersecurity protections for pipelines to defend against ransomware and other attacks. Colonial had turned down a comprehensive audit before the event, which might have helped prevent the event. But it was voluntary, so they said no thanks. We don't want to know about our vulnerabilities. Last week, TSA issued basic cybersecurity enhancements for the aviation sector. They'll go into effect early next year. I understand TSA intends to issue a security directive for passenger rail, high-risk freight rail, transit sector as early as today or this week. So this is appropriate time for this hearing. both the GAO, sorry, and the Department of Transportation's Office of Inspector General, who we'll hear from today, have made thousands of recommendations related to cybersecurity weaknesses at federal agencies. Many of these recommendations remain unaddressed. Some of their more alarming findings find DOT's failure to implement cybersecurity risk management and strategy, weaknesses in FAA's approach to cybersecurity for avionics systems in a commercial aircraft. Similarly, DOTIG has uncovered a range of cybersecurity deficiencies deemed information security one of the department's top management challenges. Evidence of inconsistent software updates, lax enforcement of federal cybersecurity requirements, IT systems at DOT that are vulnerable to exploitation by hostile actors. I look forward to hearing from our expert witnesses today on the best mitigation and potential solutions that we can put forward. With that, I recognize the ranking member who hopefully had better control of his voice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I give my statement, I do want to acknowledge your announcement that you're not going to be seeking re-election next term, and I want to commend you for your long and distinguished career serving over 3 decades in the House of Representatives. I think that says a lot. I have no doubt that you're going to finish out your term and you're going to work just as hard as ever on behalf of your district and your constituents. And I also believe that you and I agree that transportation and infrastructure is one of the best and most important committees in Congress. And I know you will continue to work diligently to address the vital issues before this committee in the coming months. I do wish you and your family all the best in your retirement. Turning to today's hearing, we will continue an examination on cybersecurity challenges for the transportation and infrastructure sectors. During our first hearing on this topic in November, we heard from the prospective owners and operators of these critical assets about the steps that they have taken to improve their cybersecurity posture, the threats and risks that they still face, and the effectiveness of federal government cyber activities. Now we will hear testimony from some of those federal agencies themselves and learn how they are providing support to transportation infrastructure operators in boosting their cybersecurity preparedness and response capabilities. Stakeholders have expressed concerns about aspects of those federal programs. For instance, the recent security directives from the TSA, and I hope we can get some answers on how to improve their implementation. We also will hear today from how federal agencies are protecting their own systems, their own data, and infrastructure from ever-changing cyber threats. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses, the panel, about the cyber challenges that they've identified and examined for the federal agencies under the committee's jurisdiction, as well as receive updates from those agencies on how they are rising to meet these challenges. And I appreciate our witnesses joining us today and discussing how operators and federal agencies can work collaboratively to improve the cybersecurity of our nation's critical infrastructure systems and transportation systems and transportation infrastructure. So with that, I would yield back and look forward to it.
Video, there, video, make a video stay. The video does not want to stay on. Damn it. It just keeps blinking off. There, no. Okay, all right, good, thanks. Thanks for the kind words, Sam. And, I know that the committee will continue its great work, between your leadership and others on the committee. With that, I'd like to move to recognizing the witnesses here today. The first is Mr. Cordell Schachter, Chief Information Officer, or CIO, DOT. Mr. Larry Grossman, Chief Information Security Officer, Federal Aviation Administration. Ms. Victoria Newhouse, Deputy Assistant Administrator for Policy Plans and Engagement, Transportation Security Administration. Rear Admiral John W. Mauger, Assistant Commandant for Prevention Policy, Coast Guard, United States Coast Guard. Mr. Kevin Dorsey, Assistant Inspector General for Information Technology Audits, Office of Inspector General, Department of Transportation. and Mr. Nick Marinos, Director, Information Technology, Cybersecurity at the GAO. With that, I would first recognize Mr. Schachter for 5 minutes. Mr. Schachter.
Good morning, Chair DeFazio, Ranking Member Graves, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today and for your support of the Department of Transportation. I'm Cordell Schachter, Chief Information Officer. I'm honored to be here with FAA Chief Information Security Officer, Larry Grossman, U.S. DOT Office of Inspector General, Assistant Inspector General for IT Audits, Kevin Dorsey, and officials from the U.S. Coast Guard, the Transportation Security Administration, and the Government Accountability Office. I was appointed U.S. DOT's Chief Information Officer on August 30th of this year. My testimony today is based on my observations and review of DOT records during my 3 months in this position. My testimony is also informed by my 26 years of service as a local government official in New York City, 13 years of that service as Chief Technology Officer and CIO of New York City's Department of Transportation. In between 2 tours of New York City government service, I worked 9 years for several multinational technology companies. I have also taught master's level courses in civic technology at New York University in New York City and at St. Peter's University in Jersey City, New Jersey. I believe U.S. DOT's cybersecurity program has improved the department's information security posture, and we're on a path for continual improvement according to government best practices. U.S. DOT's executive ranks have many positions filled by professionals with the knowledge and the expertise of providing service directly to the public. This begins with Secretary Pete Buttigieg, Deputy Secretary Polly Trottenberg, and the leaders of many of our operating administrations or modes. They have also held key elected and appointed leadership positions in cities and states, solving problems, protecting citizens, and improving the quality of life of their constituents. We now have before us one of the greatest opportunities to improve the quality of life for all Americans. We look forward to partnering with Congress and our sister federal agencies to implement the landmark bipartisan infrastructure law. On the same day that President Biden signed the law, he executed an executive order to ensure, among other priorities, increased coordination across the public sector to implement it effectively. We commit to that goal. Our executive leadership team's experience includes making improvements to systems while they continue to operate. Similarly, we'll continue to improve our existing systems to make them more cyber secure while they continue to operate so that they resiliently support DOT's operations and the American people. I want to transparently acknowledge that we have multiple open audit findings from previous OIG and GAO cybersecurity audits. We respect and take seriously their assessments. I have designated cybersecurity improvement as the top priority for DOT's Information Technology Organization, the Office of the Chief Information Officer. We have begun a series of cyber sprints to complete tasks and make plans to meet our federal cybersecurity requirements and implement best practices, including those from President Biden's executive order for improving the nation's cybersecurity. The cyber sprints prioritize 3 areas: system access control, website security, and improved governance, oversight, and coordination across DOT. These priority activities address OIG and GAO findings. DOT is actively working to meet its responsibilities to securely improve the department's information technology infrastructure while implementing our portions of the bipartisan infrastructure law. We will also meet the challenge of continuously improving the cybersecurity of DOT information technology systems while keeping those systems available for use. We look forward to working with this committee, our agency partners, and the White House to strengthen and protect our infrastructure and systems. Thank you again for this opportunity to testify. I will be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Schachter, for doing it exactly in 5 minutes. Appreciate that. We'll now move on to Mr. Larry Grossman. Mr. Grossman.
Good morning. From air traffic control to the largest airliner or the lightest drone, connectivity is the way of the future in aerospace. It's also why we have to constantly raise the bar when it comes to cybersecurity. Chair Del Fazio, Ranking Member Graves, members of the committee, cyber threats are an ongoing concern, and our increasing reliance on highly integrated and interdependent computers and networks is cause for vigilance at all levels of the aviation industry. This is especially true at FAA, where we are responsible for operating the nation's air traffic control system and overseeing the design, manufacture, and testing of aircraft and systems, including avionics. And also for me personally as a pilot, a flight instructor, and an aircraft owner. But I'm here today to discuss FAA's approach to cybersecurity within our agency, for those we regulate, and for the aerospace community at large. I want to start by noting the importance of this administration's recent executive order on improving the nation's cybersecurity. And I want to thank Congress for the continuing guidance and direction over many years. The FAA's efforts to address cyber challenges have benefited from your oversight and the cooperative efforts with other executive branch agencies. We appreciate all input as we continually strive to make our aerospace system safer and more efficient. You've heard Administrator Dixon say it before, and I'll repeat it here again. Safety is a journey, not a destination. The same is true of cybersecurity. What we do today will not be good enough for tomorrow or the day after. We are always striving to improve. We are constantly updating and evolving FAA's cybersecurity strategy. We put into action through cross-agency cybersecurity steering committee. The strategy includes protecting and defending FAA networks and systems, enhancing our risk management capabilities, building and maintaining workforce capabilities, and engaging with external partners. We defend our air traffic control and other networks by using separate and distinct security perimeters and controls that are the responsibility of the FAA Chief Information Security Officer and FAA Chief Information Officer. To assess cyber threats and vulnerabilities to our networks, we've developed a cyber test facility at our William J. Hughes Technical Center, where we also conduct testing and evaluation. We ensure cyber resilience in connected aircraft through risk assessments during initial certification process or anytime there is a change to a previous design certification. When existing regulations will not provide adequate protection, we issue special conditions. Throughout an aircraft's life, operators must track cybersecurity issues in much the same way they do for all other issues, using data-driven methodologies. That allows operators and the FAA to make informed risk management decisions. Smart decisions require talented and dedicated cyber workforce, and we continue to invest in our people. Congress recognized the importance of this effort, and in 2018 asked the FAA to enter into an agreement with the National Academy of Science to conduct a cybersecurity workforce study. The results of that study, which we received in June, made it clear that there is more work to do. Although I will say that many of the recommendations are consistent with FAA's cybersecurity strategic objectives, and many others align with broader ongoing FAA workforce development and recruitment efforts. And finally, one of the major components of our strategy is to build and maintain relationships and trust with our external partners. This is critical for defending and reacting and recovering from a cyber attack. It's why we are a lead agency on the Aviation Cyber Initiative Interagency Task Force with DHS and DoD. It's why we work collectively to identify and address cybersecurity risks in the aviation ecosystem. The ecosystem includes stakeholders ranging from airport authorities to manufacturers. As technology of the aviation ecosystem evolves, we expect that cybersecurity will continue to be a growing challenge and a significant component of aviation safety and aerospace efficiency. We are prepared for this challenge and look forward to keeping Congress and this committee informed on your progress. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
And thank you. Thank you, Mr. Grossman. Now, Ms. Victoria Newhouse, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman DeFazio, Ranking Member Graves, and distinguished members of this committee. My name is Victoria Newhouse, and I serve as the Deputy Assistant Administrator for Policy, Plans, and Engagement at the Transportation Security Administration. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss TSA's important role in cybersecurity for our nation's infrastructure. As you know, TSA was established by the Aviation and Transportation Security Act, which was signed into law on November 19, 2001. Under that law, TSA assumed the mission to oversee transportation security in all modes of transportation, be that aviation or the nation's surface transportation system, mass transit and passenger rail, freight rail, highway, motor carriers, pipeline, as well as supporting maritime security with our United States Coast Guard partners. As we recently observed TSA's 20th anniversary, we rededicated ourselves to our critical mission to protect our nation's transportation systems. My personal commitment to TSA's important mission to ferociously protect our homeland is fueled by my own personal experience on September 11, 2001, surviving the attack on the Pentagon on that fateful day when we all lost over 2,977 friends, family members, and colleagues. This is not a mission we can accomplish alone. Our success is highly dependent on close collaboration and strong relationships with our transportation industry stakeholders and our federal agency partners, including several who are on this esteemed panel today. Cybersecurity incidents affecting transportation are a growing, evolving, and persistent threat. Across U.S. critical infrastructure, cyber threat actors have demonstrated their willingness and ability to conduct malicious cyber activities, targeting critical infrastructure by exploiting the vulnerability of operational technology and information technology systems. Malicious cyber actors continue to target U.S. critical infrastructure through transportation systems. For instance, as mentioned earlier, the ransomware incident against the Colonial Pipeline last May underscores this threat. TSA is highly dedicated to protecting our transportation networks against these evolving threats, and we continue to work collaboratively with public and private stakeholders to drive the implementation of intelligence-driven, risk-based policies and programs, and continue our robust information sharing efforts. As reflected in the cybersecurity infrastructure testimony provided by our industry colleagues on November 4th of this year, we have a vital national interest in understanding, mitigating, and protecting its people and infrastructure from cybersecurity threats. Constantly evolving potential for malicious cyber activity against the transportation infrastructure points to the need for continued vigilance, information sharing, and development of dynamic policies and capabilities to strengthen our cybersecurity posture. TSA has sought to mitigate the degradation, destruction, or malfunction of systems that control this infrastructure by implementing immediate security requirements through security policies. After the Colonial Pipeline ransomware incident in May, there was a clear understanding that we need to take more actions to prevent another pipeline incident in the future. In that vein, TSA issued 2 security directives to immediately address these threats. We required the pipeline operators who operate and transport over 85% of the nation's energy and assets to take immediate actions to report cybersecurity incidents to my partner agency, Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Agency, designate an express cybersecurity coordinator that is available 24/7, and implement specific mitigation measures. We continue our work across all of our modes as credible cyber threat information is driving our most recent efforts to issue more directives in this vein. As Chairman DeFazio mentioned earlier, we are working with our rail, higher risk freight rail, passenger rail, and rail transit operators and aviation in 4 critical actions. Designate a cybersecurity coordinator, reporting incidents to CISA, developing an incident response plan, and conducting self-assessments to address potential vulnerabilities and gaps. Chairman DeFazio, we continue our robust engagement with our partners through our Surface Transportation Security Advisory Committee and our Aviation Security Advisory Committee along with numerous corporate executives, all the way down to the security level. Chairman DeFazio, we'd like, on behalf of all of my colleagues at TSA, we would like to congratulate you on your decades of service and thank you for your service to all of us in our nation. I look forward to taking any questions you may have. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Ms. Newhouse. I have quite a history with TSA. John Micah chaired the aviation subcommittee and I was ranking. And it was under our jurisdiction then. We had no Homeland Security Committee and we stood it up in pretty short order. I'm going to say it's still a work in progress, but it's so far ahead of where we were pre 9/11 that I'd love to go into that at some point, talk about. But anyway, not the subject of this hearing. Rear Admiral John W. Marger.
Good morning, Chairman DeFazio, Ranking Member Graves, and distinguished members of the committee. I am honored to be here this morning to discuss cybersecurity in the maritime transportation system, a top priority for the Coast Guard. Our national security and economic prosperity are inextricably linked to a safe and efficient marine transportation system, or MTS. The MTS is an integrated network of 361 ports and 25,000 miles of waterways. Marine transportation supports 1/4 of US GDP and provides employment for 1 in 7 working age Americans. The MTS enables our armed forces to project power around the globe, and any substantial disruption to marine transportation can cause cascading effects to our economy and to our national security. Cyber attacks are a significant threat to the maritime critical infrastructure. And while we must continue to work to prevent attacks, we must also be clear-eyed that attacks will occur, and we must ensure that the MTS is resilient. Protecting maritime critical infrastructure and ensuring resiliency is a shared responsibility. Thank you for holding both sessions to allow industry and government to describe their efforts. The Coast Guard is the nation's lead federal agency for protecting the MTS. In August, the Commandant released a cyber strategic outlook to guide our work ahead. At the core of the Coast Guard strategy is the recognition that cybersecurity is an operational imperative, both for our service and for the maritime industry. With support from Congress, we established Coast Guard Cyber Command and built an operational force to execute missions and protect Coast Guard and DoD networks. Coast Guard cyber forces are manned, trained, and equipped in accordance with joint DoD standards, but have a broad range of authorities to address complex issues spanning national defense and homeland security, including protecting the MTS. The Coast Guard's approach to protecting the MTS leverages our proven prevention and response framework. To prevent incidents, we leverage our authorities in the nation's ports to set standards and conduct compliance. We refer to this as cyber risk management and require accountability, assessments, mitigations, exercises, and incident reporting. To prepare for and respond to cyber incidents, Coast Guard sectors are leading field-level exercises with area maritime security committees and have established unified commands with FBI and CISA to lead the federal response to cyber attacks in the ports. Cyber attacks will increasingly have physical impacts beyond computer networks. By incorporating cybersecurity into our prevention and response framework, we provide a comprehensive all-hazards approach to this threat. But we cannot do this alone. As the co-sector risk management for transportation, we look to both CISA and TSA as key partners. The MTS is dependent on other critical infrastructure. CISA coordinates across sectors, shares threat and vulnerability information, and provides cyber technical assistance. These efforts build coherence within the interagency, foster collaboration with the private sector, and enhance our ability to protect the MTS. Our relationships with CISA and TSA are strong and will continue to mature. Cybersecurity is a shared responsibility with the private sector as well. Collaboration with the industry is paramount and focused on information sharing and good governance. At the national level, we stood up a Maritime Cyber Readiness Branch within Coast Guard Cyber Command as a focal point for maritime threat monitoring, information sharing, and response coordination. At the local level, we continue to strengthen communications through engagement at our area maritime security committees. Risk-based regulations, which leverage international and industry-recognized standards, are the foundation for good governance. With congressional support, we established the National Maritime Security Advisory Committee to facilitate consultation with industry on standards development. We worked with the International Maritime Organization, or IMO, to address the risks posed by foreign vessels. We are committed to a transparent approach as we balance the urgency of cyber threats with informed rulemaking. The cyber threat is dynamic. As we continually evolve to address emergent needs, we will need Congress's continued support. We are grateful for the fiscal year 21 appropriations. The investments in Coast Guard Cyber Command provide additional capability for our service and serve a key role in protecting the MTS. The establishment of 22 MTS cyber advisors in the field are key nodes for coordination and collaboration at our field units. We look forward to the continued dialogue with Congress on this important issue, and I appreciate the opportunity to testify and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Admiral. Mr. Kevin Dorsey.
Good morning, Chairman DeFazio, Ranking Member Graves, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to testify on securing our nation's infrastructure in an evolving cybersecurity landscape. The Department of Transportation relies on over 400 IT systems to ensure the safety and efficiency of our nation's transportation system. As you know, malicious cyber attacks and other compromises to these systems and DOT networks may put public safety, sensitive information, or taxpayer dollars at risk. Our office has long identified cybersecurity as one of the department's top management challenges. Today, I will focus on three key areas. One, developing a comprehensive DOT-wide cybersecurity strategy to address recurring weaknesses. Two, protecting IT infrastructure and sensitive information within DOT's operating administrations. And three, coordinating with other agencies and industry partners. First, on the whole, DOT has established formal policies and procedures for a cybersecurity program that align with federal guidelines. However, it still faces challenges implementing this program in a consistent or comprehensive manner. As a result, DOT faces the risk that its mission-critical systems could be compromised. Our office has reported on longstanding deficiencies due to DOT's inconsistent enforcement of an enterprise-wide information security program, ineffective communication with its operating administrations, and inadequate efforts to remediate recurring weaknesses. Many of these weaknesses can be attributed to DOT's lack of progress in addressing 66 of our prior audit recommendations, including those to resolve more than 10,000 identified vulnerabilities. Leadership challenges also limit DOT's oversight. For example, the individual serving as the acting Chief Information Security Officer over the last year was not tasked with information security as an official primary duty. That has made it difficult for DOT to implement long-term changes. Second, DOT must better protect the IT infrastructure managed by its operating administrations. For example, to increase cybersecurity, FAA must finish selecting and implementing more stringent security controls for 45 high-impact systems that are critical for safely managing air traffic. In addition, unresolved security control deficiencies with FTA's financial management systems could impede its ability to disperse billions of grant dollars. Furthermore, during vulnerability assessments and penetration testing of the IT infrastructure at multiple operating administrations, we were able to gain unauthorized access to millions of sensitive records, including personal identifiable information. Finally, DOT is one of the lead agencies designated to protect the nation's transportation infrastructure. As such, it must effectively partner with other federal agencies and the private sector on efforts such as securing cloud-based services and meeting the president's recently issued executive order on improving cybersecurity. To that end, FAA is working with DHS and DoD on the Aviation Cyber Initiative. Still, as the U.S. upgrades its transportation infrastructure, DOT must continue to strengthen and secure its IT systems and networks while working to improve its efforts to respond to increasingly sophisticated malicious cyber campaigns. We remain committed to supporting DOT's efforts as it works to remediate existing vulnerabilities and bolster its overall cybersecurity posture. We will continue to update you on our work on these and related matters. This concludes my prepared statement. I would be happy to address any questions from you or members of the committee at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Dorsey. And now finally, this is ridiculous, Mr. Nick Marinos.
Thank you, Chairman DeFazio, Ranking Member Graves, and members of the committee for inviting GAO to contribute to this important discussion about critical infrastructure cybersecurity. As you know, our nation's infrastructure increasingly relies on IT systems to carry out operations, and the protection of these systems is vital to public confidence and safety and to national security. GAO has long emphasized the urgent need for the federal government to improve its ability to protect against cyber threats to our nation's infrastructure. In fact, we've designated cybersecurity as a government-wide high-risk area since 1997. Our most recent high-risk updates to Congress emphasize the need for the federal government to address major cybersecurity challenges through 10 critical actions. Today, I will focus on 2 of them. The first is the need to develop and execute a comprehensive national cyber strategy, and the second is the need to strengthen the federal role in protecting critical infrastructure from cyber threats. Over the last several decades, the federal government has struggled in establishing a national strategy to guide how we plan to engage both domestically and internationally on cyber-related issues. Last year, we reported that the prior administration's national cyber strategy needed improvements, and that it was unclear which official was ultimately responsible for coordinating the execution of the national strategy. We recommended that the National Security Council update the document and that Congress consider passing legislation to designate a position in the White House to lead such an effort. In January, we saw Congress pass a law that established the Office of the National Cyber Director within the Executive Office of the President. And in June, the Senate confirmed a director to lead this new office. While this is an important step forward, until we see the executive branch establish a comprehensive strategy, our government will continue to operate without a clear roadmap for how it intends to overcome the cyber threats facing the nation. We've also long reported that the federal government has been challenged in working with the private sector to protect our nation's critical infrastructure from cyber attacks. Since 2010, we've made over 80 recommendations aimed at strengthening the role in critical infrastructure. This includes by enhancing the capabilities and services of DHS's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, known as CISA, and ensuring that federal agencies with sector-specific responsibilities are providing their sector partners with the effective guidance and support they need. These include important corrective actions within the transportation sector too, such as improving FAA's oversight of commercial airplane cybersecurity and TSA's oversight of the cybersecurity of both critical pipeline and passenger rail systems. Finally, I'd like to highlight the urgency for federal agencies to implement all of the cyber-related recommendations that have come out of the work performed by GAO and the Inspectors General. Since 2010, GAO has made over 3,700 recommendations on cyber-related topics. Many of these recommendations extend far beyond topics related to critical infrastructure, but they represent work that is needed to elevate the entire federal government in its ability to tackle today's cyber problems and to anticipate those we will face in the future. For example, they deal with important workforce issues, such as our recommendation to the Department of Transportation that it assess its skill gaps in order to better oversee automated technologies like those that control planes, trains, or vehicles without human intervention. They also call for improvements to federal agencies' own protections, such as through our recommendations to DHS that it work with agencies, including FAA, to better implement cybersecurity tools that check for vulnerabilities and insecure configurations on agency networks. Although agencies deserve credit for implementing many of our recommendations, over 900 still have yet to be implemented, including over 50 related to improving critical infrastructure cybersecurity. So clearly there's a lot more work to do, and we think that agencies need to move with a greater sense of urgency to improve their cybersecurity protections. In summary, in order for our nation to overcome its ever-mounting and increasing array of cyber-related challenges, Our federal government needs to do a better job of implementing strategy, oversight, and coordination among federal agencies and with the owners and operators that are on the front lines of this digital battle. This concludes my remarks, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. I will try and squeak out a couple of questions here. Mr. Grossman, what are, let's say the top 3 cybersecurity challenges at the FAA, and what are you doing to quickly implement measures to mitigate this?
Thank you for your question, Chairman DeFazio. The FAA operates, large, complex infrastructure of interconnected networks and services. We have many service providers. Connectivity includes satellite-based communications, automated communications between aircraft, et cetera. The process system has become very, very complex. Most of our challenges really are around the purpose-built, legacy NAS systems that are in operation today. These systems are operated 24/7, 365. They require extensive testing and operate custom-built software. Really, they don't allow remote patching capabilities. So, keeping up with the cyber hygiene component is a fairly large challenge from an FAA air traffic control perspective. We protect that system though through compensating controls, meaning that that network, while it's very difficult to patch and update, it is very difficult to get to attach to as well. It doesn't have internet access. There are a very mature access control list. In other words, system A can only speak to system B, over very specific ports with very specific protocols, and everything else is not addressed. Additionally, we
quickly one more.
Okay. Sure.
Mr. Dorsey, you were pretty critical, I thought. Do you agree with Mr. Grossman's assessment on the top challenges, and why do you think they aren't yet rectified?
Thank you for your question, Chairman DeFazio. I think the 3 key top challenges for the department are to solidify leadership at the Chief Information Security Officer level to provide the needed leadership oversight and accountability necessary for agency-wide improvements to address ongoing information security weaknesses. 2, I think the department needs to develop a comprehensive DOT-wide cybersecurity strategy to address recurring weaknesses. And 3, it needs to better protect and secure its IT infrastructure and sensitive information from potential compromises. Those are the 3 key areas I believe the department needs to focus on to address the weaknesses that we have identified over the last 10 years.
So, Mr. Grossman, are those things in progress?
Well, I am the Chief Information Security Officer for the FAA, so there is leadership within FAA. We are working with the OIG to close, these audit recommendations. We believe that we have protections in place. While many of the compliance type audits have, a lot of findings, the actual vulnerabilities are, in our opinion, most of them are mitigated through compensating controls.
Okay. All right. I've exhausted my time.
Sir, when I was speaking of when I was speaking of the Chief Information Security Officer, I was speaking about at the department level. They're responsible for providing oversight of all of the OAs, including FAA. Thank you.
So you're saying at DOT, sub FAA and other agencies?
Yes, sir. Thank you. There's no permanent Chief Information Security Officer at the department level at this time. When we were
Okay.
conducting our reviews last year, he was serving as the acting Chief Information Security Officer.
Okay, all right, well, thank you. I'm gonna yield now to Ranking Member Graves because he can ask questions better with a voice than I can. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a committee, we continue to hear conflicting reports from TSA and pipeline industry stakeholders regarding the process and engagement throughout the issuance of 2 TSA security directives. Furthermore, myself and Ranking Member Graves, as well as Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Ranking Member Portman, sent letters to DHS OIG to review the process in which TSA insists a draft of the directives, which I ask unanimous consent to be entered into the record, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to Ms. Newhouse, how would TSA evaluate implementation of the pipeline security directives?
Thank you for your question, Ranking Member Graves. We continue extensive engagement. I think that's the hallmark of what we are doing in order to ensure continuous improvement. We have actually developed and implemented an entire field surface operational structure to do this. So we have boots on ground. And what we have been finding thus far, as you mentioned, sir, we have issued 2 security directives this summer, post-Colonial Pipeline. We're proud to announce on behalf of us and our stakeholders that all stakeholders that are subject to that directive have met all of the requirements in the very first security directive. It had very tight guidelines, communicated beautifully with us, very vocal, and frankly, very direct with us when they met challenges.
Let me ask you about those challenges, if I could. What challenges have you identified during implementation?
Well, I think the biggest one, and we've actually taken this to heart, is the definition of a reportable cybersecurity incident. And we have taken steps and a great deal of feedback to modify that definition to not include all potential incidents.
Okay.
We have narrowed that and focused that based on industry feedback.
Excellent. Recently, the Oil and Natural Gas Pipeline Trade Associations jointly requested TSA conduct an advance notice of proposed rulemaking to gather information vital to drafting a proposed regulation to replace the expiring security directives. Ask unanimous consent for this letter to be entered into the record, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
Thank you, sir. I hate to keep bothering you with that. I know your throat's killing you. As they stated, TSA can leverage the ANPR informal process to promote a greater understanding of what are reasonable, applicable, auditable, and sustainable regulations. Will TSA issue an ANPRM to gather this important information?
Thank you for your question, Ranking Member. We are considering all of our options, including the most transparent options. An ANPRM, or Advanced Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, is one tool that we have exercised in the past successfully. And as we have continued robust engagement, both at the classified and unclassified level with all of our surface transportation stakeholders, in particular our pipeline, rail, freight rail, passenger rail, and aviation stakeholders, we're considering all of those options. So yes, sir, that is on the table.
As you know, we are anticipating the release of a new security directive for rail. Should be as early as this afternoon, if I understand correctly. Unfortunately, we've heard concerns about the development of these directives from stakeholders, including from the freight rail industry. At our previous hearing on cybersecurity and in a November 4th letter from American Public Transportation Association, which I also ask unanimous consent to be entered into the record. I apologize for that inconvenience one more time, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
Ms. Newhouse, how much stakeholder engagement has TSA conducted while working on these directives, and how is TSA specifically incorporating feedback into these directives?
Thank you. Thank you, Ranking Member. We have continued robust engagement, and frankly, we have been working extremely closely with the United States intelligence community, our partners at CISA, and particularly Department of Homeland Security, DOT, Energy, and across the interagency to provide that background information, that threat information that is driving all of these requirements. As recently as this week, I, along with several of my top leadership here at TSA, have met with freight rail and passenger rail executives with a classified briefing in our facilities to show them what we're seeing, elicit inputs, and ask them for more inputs for either future requirements or other guidelines that we could issue together, vice us just telling them this is what they need to do. So we've been having some successful engagements. As a matter of fact, today, a number of pipeline individuals, CISOs, and other security personnel are receiving briefings as we speak. And we do have an apparatus around the United States to support those briefings, thanks to our law enforcement and intelligence community partners.
Will you consider utilizing a federal rulemaking process for any future cyber requirements?
I think his time has expired.
Absolutely. Ranking member, all of those options are on the table.
Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. Representative Norton is now recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I hope everyone can hear me. My first question is for Mr. Shatner of DOT, Mr. Grossman of FAA, Ms. Newhouse of TSA. I'm interested in information sharing among federal partners. You each oversee critical infrastructure entities with some overlap, especially regarding aviation and surface transportation, which I'm particularly interested in because I sit on the subcommittee on aviation and serve as chair of the subcommittee on highways and transit. Can you explain to us in some detail how you collaborate to oversee the same sectors and critical infrastructure entities? Ms. Shatner, Mr. Shatter, Mr. Grossman, Ms. Newhouse.
Am I on mute? Thank you very much for that question, Congresswoman. Information sharing is vital to securing the nation's critical infrastructure and the infrastructure that DOT is responsible for. We collaborate extensively within DOT. We collaborate with the FAA and also with our federal partners, in particular, TSA, CISA, and even with OMB, which houses the Federal Chief Information Security Officer. Krista Russia, the Federal Chief Information Security Officer, was one of the first federal officials that I met virtually, of course, after joining the DOT in late August. I have had subsequent sessions with Jen Easterly, as well as Chris Inglis, the CISA Director and National Cyber Director. And we intend to keep up an open channel of communication, as well as following up on various directives and formal information sharing that DHS has required.
Thank you. Mr. Marinas, Mr. Dorsey, can you highlight cybersecurity issues that give you the most concern, and also explain why you believe the government has repeatedly failed to fully address them?
Yes, Congresswoman, I could jump in first, and perhaps Kevin can go after. I think that the bottom line is that we are constantly operating behind the 8 ball. The reality is that it just takes one successful cyber attack to take down an organization, and each federal agency, as well as owners and operators in critical infrastructure, have to protect themselves against countless numbers of attacks. And so in order to do that, we need our federal government to be operating in the most strategic way possible. So as I mentioned in my oral statement, the importance of having a national strategy isn't just to have something on paper, but to actually execute that strategy. And that also carries forward to those agencies like the Department of Transportation, TSA, and others who have sector-specific responsibilities to do the same. We have seen consistently in our work that agencies have had challenges in maintaining very up-to-date sector plans that actually would talk about the cyber threats that agencies are facing and the infrastructure is facing today. So we think it's very important for sector-specific agencies to work with their industry partners to make sure that they're operating off the same song sheet, if you will.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady for yielding back. I'm now going to yield the chair to Andre Carson, who, as we all know, has a loud and booming voice, and you'll be able to understand him. So thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I hope you feel better. We appreciate you. Mr. Gibbs.
Thank you, Chair. This hearing's title, How Can Evolving Cybersecurity Landscape, Federal Perspectives on Securing the Nation's Infrastructure. I was really kind of surprised we didn't bring in a witness from the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA. Might be a good idea for the future. Admiral Muger, and we had testimony in the past, and we know that the Coast Guard is trying to upgrade your own IT systems and the significant challenges you face in doing that. Can you provide us an update on how the Coast Guard is working to improve in this area, to improve your IT systems and that you've been mandated by Congress to do?
Congressman Gibbs, our approach to protecting the maritime transportation system relies on us having our own ability to defend and operate our networks. And so as part of the Commandant's strategy for our work ahead, he has put defend and operate the networks, protect maritime critical infrastructure, and enable Coast Guard operations as those three pillars for how we move forward to accomplish all of our missions. With regard to defending and operating our networks, through investments in the CARES Act, with over $65 million in funding, we've been able to make significant investments to modernize our infrastructure and push more information out to our mobile users out in the field and our cutters underway. But all of this is premised, our security is premised on it being an operational imperative. And so the key thing that's really driven us forward is the establishment of Coast Guard Cyber Command as an operational command under the purview of a two-star commander that oversees our daily mission execution in the IT space. And then the coordination with our CIO, who is driving those investment and modernization projects forward.
Okay. Thank you. Also, Admiral, can you expand a little bit on the activities and resources you're making available to the ports to work with our port facilities at the port level on their IT infrastructure, cybersecurity?
Okay, I'll connect with them afterwards.
Congressman, at the port level, we're really focused on working across the prevention and response framework to ensure that we have the ability to defend and then also respond resiliently from attacks. This is a shared responsibility between the private sector and the federal agencies involved. And so we're doing a number of different things. First of all, we put in standards in place that require them to conduct assessments, have an accountable person, develop a plan, mitigate that plan, exercise it, and report incidents. All those pieces are really important. Through those assessments, we then have the opportunity to drive investments through the Port Security Grant Program to update security posture in the ports. And so last year, $17 million was allocated from the Port Security Grant Program for cybersecurity. These are some of the areas where things that are being done to increase the capability of the commercial infrastructure while also maintaining our operational ability.
Also, Admiral, as your role as Assistant Commandant for Prevention Policy, you're responsible for the Coast Guard's maritime safety and security regulatory programs. You know, what do you say? Which side is winning, the increased cyber threats or increased digital-based safety operational enhancements? How are we doing? I guess its essence is how are we doing in this fight? Who's winning it?
Congressman, it's not an either-or proposition for this. It's really an all of the above. And so as the Assistant Commandant for Prevention Policy, we make sure that we bring together the best of our ability to secure private industry, but then be able to respond as well. And so leveraging our prevention and response framework, we've made sure that we've taken a multi-layered approach to engaging with the industry, sharing information with them at the local level through the area maritime security committees and conducting compliance activities. And then at the national level, engaging across the interagency with our National Maritime Security Advisory Committee, with the MTS, ISAC, and then with other interagency partners to make sure that we're tied together and providing a comprehensive network and comprehensive approach to this problem.
Thank you. I'm just about out of time. I just want to mention that I know you're not a cybersecurity expert yourself, and so hopefully you're aware of that fact and you're coordinating with your cybersecurity people, both at the Coast Guard, also in the private sector. I have to yield back. I'm out of time. Thank you for your service.
Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Dorsey, has the GAO investigated the progress of the federal agencies or the private sector in implementing the guidance and requirements laid out in the May executive order from the President to modernize and strengthen the defense of federal technology systems?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. However, you asked whether or not the GAO has investigated. I think that question should be directed towards the GAO representative. If I'm not mistaken.
I'm sorry, yeah. Well, the GAO representative, Mr. Marinos, can answer that.
Yes, Congressman, happy to. We have looked at aspects of the executive order. We actually just have work underway right now, specifically looking at the progress that's been made by the administration in actually overseeing whether the many requirements that it's placed on agencies have actually been adhered to. So there are aspects within it that our work has touched on, including cloud computing and supply chain more recently, but we have work underway right now that's going to be looking squarely at the executive order.
And do you have the timeline laid out for the report already?
We're expecting to be able to periodically report on the status of implementing the executive order throughout the upcoming calendar year. So we're looking to provide information out sort of in a real-time basis, looking to provide something closer to the early spring.
Early spring, thank you. And Mr. Dorsey, then, though, back to you, at what point would the DOTIG get involved?
Well, actually, thank you for your question, Congressman. Actually, we have actually already initiated a review of the DOT's efforts to implement cloud-based services with respect to the requests or issues that were identified in the presidential executive order for directing federal agencies to ensure that they secure their cloud-based services as they migrate forward. We're also planning to look at the department's efforts to implement or migrate towards a zero trust architecture as outlined in the president's executive order 2. I've also been in contact with the department's chief information officer, and he has informed me that the department is working towards addressing the current initiatives. And I plan to work with him over the next year or two to ensure that the department is doing what they say they're planning to do, as well as report back to this administration as necessary. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Grossman, the U.S. aviation sector is very complex. I'm sure that you are considering that complexity as you consider how to make the system less vulnerable to cyber attacks. But the testimony from GAO in the first part of the hearing a few weeks ago stated that less than half of the respondents to a global study investigating cybersecurity trends within the air transport industry identified cybersecurity as a top organizational risk. Have you all considered how Congress can incentivize the private sector to address cybersecurity issues?
How Congress can
incentivize the private sector to address these cybersecurity issues that persist in the air transport industry?
Well, we have reached out to industry through the Aviation Cyber Initiative extensively. We've built a community of interest of over 1,000 members that's across all of the components of the aviation ecosystem, and we're using the bully pulpit to and it seems to be From an aviation perspective, we seem to be gaining a lot of traction.
Can I follow up on that with a particular issue? And I don't know if you're handling this at the FAA, but Chair DeFazio and I recently have expressed safety concerns to the Federal Communications Commission on the telecom industry's plan to utilize the C-band for 5G broadband service and the potential interference with aircraft radio altimeters. I know that Administrator Dixon is weighing in on this with the FCC. Can you update us on what the status of that is? And as well, are there other technologies that are coming online that we need to be concerned about?
Congressman, thank you for that question. I'm not personally involved with the 5G effort, but I am aware that the telecommunications companies have voluntarily agreed to a 1-month deployment delay to their 5G C-band to allow further safety analysis. We believe that aviation and 5G C-band wireless services can safely coexist, and the FCC and FAA are using this time to gather, exchange information to come up with a path forward.
Yeah, I guess implied in our letter is that whatever solution you all think you come up with, we'd be very interested in that solution to make some determinations about our own thoughts on it.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Perry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Schechter and Mr. Marinos, during last month's hearing on cybersecurity threats, I had an interesting back and forth with Mr. Scott Belcher from the Mineta Institute regarding the increased cybersecurity threats associated with the transition to electric buses and the fact that it brings with it a whole new level of cyber exposure and other security risks not previously anticipated. Mr. Belcher agreed that these increased risks include the ability to degrade batteries remotely, cause fires, manually take over controls of the vehicle, et cetera, and went on as far as to say we'd be safer if we're still running diesel buses. Now I'm a fan of both diesel and well, all of them. Just got to be ready to implement the processes to make sure that we're safe. While we were discussing these issues in the context of electric buses purchased by transit agencies with FTA funding, these concerns are much more widespread than just buses. In fact, the same concerns apply to electric vehicles owned either by the government or by private citizens and the associated charging infrastructure. I wonder if either of you can expand on the significant increase in cybersecurity risks and threats we should expect as the result of the reckless pursuit of an electrified vehicle fleet by the majority, this administration, and unfortunately, some socialist voting members of my own party. Can you expand upon what we can expect?
Well, thank you. Thank you for that question. I think we're conflating two separate and very important issues. One is the fuel that any vehicle uses, whether it's electric power, diesel power. Inherently, they're not more or less at risk from a cyber perspective. What we're really talking about here, and the cyber issue, is the electronic control system that's on board with not only electric buses, but if you were to buy a new diesel bus or gasoline car, those vehicles all have some sort of electronic control system there, communication system, which is potentially vulnerable. And the correct steps, just like in protecting government IT systems, the correct steps need to be taken to protect the IT system in that vehicle. And when we're talking about fossil fuel powered vehicles or electric vehicles, where obviously the administration has identified addressing climate change as a top priority. And if we take the conversation to the subject of this hearing, which is cybersecurity, there are means and mechanisms of protecting those vehicles, intelligent systems on board, and we need to do that. And there's several organizations within DOT at work on that right now.
Mr. Marinos?
Yes, Congressman, we've looked at issues with respect to modern vehicle cybersecurity over the last several years. And indeed, whether the fuel is gas or electric, the reality is that we're seeing an increase in the number of interfaces, the number of chips that are being placed, and the systems that those chips are powering. In fact, that's what we're seeing right now as one of the challenges in terms of supply chain, is having those chips to be able to manufacture new cars regardless of the fuel. The reality is that if those interfaces are not properly secured, they can be exploited through direct physical access and even remotely as well. I think the reality, and maybe the very important element to this, is the need for our workforce to be able to be in the best position to oversee these types of automated technologies. And as we reported back earlier this year, we think that the Department of Transportation needs to take a close look at its workforce to make sure that as vehicles become more and more autonomous, that they have the appropriate folks in place to oversee that type of technology.
Given DOT's lackluster cybersecurity posture at this moment, do you think they were prepared to deal with a massive increase in risk? And I would characterize, well, I know that all of them have electronic interfaces, chips, and so on and so forth. Not all of them have the ability to set the battery on fire if they're not battery powered, if the battery's just in there to start the vehicle. But would you say that they are prepared to deal with the increase in risk?
I think that the department, and I don't want to speak on its behalf, but in response to our recent work, I think would also recognize that it has more to do in terms of being able to fill the skill gaps that they're going to need to fill to be in the best position to oversee this emerging technology.
Mr. Schachter?
I would say DOT's security posture is on par or even better than other organizations that I've observed. All of us, the government as a whole, as well as individual agencies, will have a continual challenge to meet cybersecurity requirements. And as was said earlier in the hearing, we receive thousands of cybersecurity attacks every day, and only one has to slip through. So normal batting averages here don't apply. We have to be perfect to protect our systems, our agencies, the government, and the American people. It's an immense challenge with limited resources. We all know that. So that I think DOT's posture is forward. Its attempts to include some of the very latest technologies. We were already on the road to many of the items that are contained in President Biden's executive order on cybersecurity before that executive order was issued. The audit that was referred to a little while ago by Mr. Dorsey regarding cloud services, they're seen as a best practice as opposed to desktop applications because they can be better protected from a common perimeter. And DOT had previously organized itself into using a common operating environment, unifying all of the operating modes, with the exception of FAA, into a single system, thereby providing one surface to protect from attacks. That's a best practice. We were there prior toward the
gentleman's time has
executive
expired.
order.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield.
Mr. Paratano.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Marinos, you highlighted in the testimony that in February of this year, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency issued an alert explaining that the cyber threat actors obtained an unauthorized access to a U.S. water treatment facility's industrial control systems and attempted to increase the amount of caustic chemical that is used as part of the treatment process. My biggest concern is on security of our water systems, including our treatment plants, our dams, and our waterways. Are we doing enough to address the water systems security, and what are your concerns in this area?
Simply put, we aren't, Congresswoman. The threats to the water infrastructure is real. And it comes from many of the same challenges that other sectors like it suffer, which include a reliance on legacy systems that are not only outdated, but beyond even being supported by the vendors that actually created them. These include also workforce issues, having appropriate staff within often very small organizations that manage these types of facilities to be able to respond. In fact, in the case of the February attack or the attempted attack, it was fortunate that there was, according to reports, an official that was actually monitoring and was able to see the efforts as it happened, so they were able to thwart it. And so I think the reality is that there needs to be more that is done. We're encouraged by the fact that Congress passed law last year to establish in law the expectations of sector-specific agencies known as sector risk management agencies, and the Environmental Protection Agency is that for the water sector. We think that EPA can do more to reach out to the sector to better understand whether the guidance that it provides is adequate to be able to address many of the challenges that I mentioned.
Would you suggest that they do training, virtual training of all water agencies, small and large?
Yes, I think that it's important for them to do that in concert with their sector partners. And so there is a good establishment of both, government and sector specific representation that, as I'm aware, based on even the prior hearing that your committee held, are working towards better training. But the reality is that we need to continue to see that happen more rapidly because those cyber threats continue to evolve as well.
Well, that is everyday security. They were having 1,000 or more security threats a day. Certainly we can train people what to look for initially without having to wait months for training.
That's a very important point, Congresswoman. It's about elevating the entire cybersecurity awareness of the nation. The reality is that until we do that, the bad guys are going to continue to exploit those that have the least knowledge and expertise in this area.
So what are your biggest concerns in the area?
Well, I think first and foremost is making sure that the support that federal government agencies is providing is the right one. And that means doing more to assess what the actual risks are to the specific sectors, and then reflecting that in actual plans that they can execute.
Would that be EPA's responsibility?
That would be EPA's. It would also be the Department of Homeland Security within CISA. We're still waiting to see a National Infrastructure Protection Plan get updated. Hoping to see that in the next couple of years, but unfortunately sectors can't wait to do that themselves.
Well, we should promote some kind of movement to immediately start assisting agencies that have no way of knowing what to look for.
Well, actually, Congresswoman, you have done that in law. So Congress did pass a law that tasked GAO with evaluating how effective sector risk management agencies are in fulfilling their statutory responsibilities. So we'll be reporting back to you in the near future.
Yes, but many agencies are too small. They don't have personnel that are either equipped or trained, and they may not know that the new law exists and would help in being able to help them identify. So we need to go down to the grassroots, to the smallest of the small.
I would agree. I think a better, not only better information about what the expectations and responsibilities are, but also what offerings the federal government can provide through CISA, through EPA and others to those operators that need the help is very important.
Well, with the Army Corps treatment, oversight over the dams, I think they should be part of it too.
They are part of the sectors that have been identified. So responsibilities do carry forward to the agencies that have responsibilities for dams as well.
Thank you very much for your concern, and I look forward to talking to you later. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, Ms. Newhouse, we understand that TSA will soon release security directives for passenger rail, freight rail, and rail transit operators. But unfortunately, though, we've heard concerns about the development of these directives from stakeholders, not the TSA, including from the freight rail industry. And that was at our previous hearing on cybersecurity and in a November 4th letter from the American Public Transportation Association, which, Mr. Chair, I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. Ms. Newhouse, it's good to see you again. I can't wait to see you all in person. Unfortunately, the TSA failed to provide this committee with advance notice of this, despite that you were coming here the same week to discuss these same cybersecurity issues. Committee staff even asked and were essentially told to wait for official congressional notification, despite what we knew of other committees receiving advance notice. After back and forth by staff, I'm told we received an embargoed copy at 9:25 a.m. this morning, which really doesn't give our team or us any time to meaningfully review and actually figure out what important questions we might have for you today to ask you about it. Further, the letters attached indicate that the directives were actually issued yesterday, December 1st, which was, I just want you to take a message back, Ms. Newhouse, that this committee, because we obviously have some jurisdiction over the issues we're talking about today, otherwise you wouldn't be here. We expect to be notified of actions that your agency is going to take, just like other committees get that notification. If anything you're doing is going to affect the modes of transportation and the safety of those modes of transportation in the areas that we have jurisdiction over, we expect to be notified here. I mean, we're one of the largest committees in Congress. Can you please make sure you send that message back to your colleagues and take that message back to TSA too? Because we're pretty frustrated, and frankly, these are issues that I think we all ought to work together on, and instead of have a minimal amount of time to be able to address them. But thank you, it's great to see you. Hope to talk to you again in the future, and I look forward to our next meeting. Mr. Marinos, it's my understanding that the GAO is in the process of completing its annual report on cybersecurity and surveillance threats to Congress. In undertaking this assessment, how has GAO pursued access to House and Senate cybersecurity data, and how does the GAO plan to ensure that information about Congress's cyber posture remains secure?
Well, first, Congressman, I just want to say that we appreciate Congress tasking us with this important review, and we take the responsibility of performing it very seriously. In terms of how we're protecting the information, we recognize that the information that we've been asked to review is very sensitive, but we also have a very long, successful track record of handling and protecting sensitive information that we receive from government agencies and also from industry. And we'll obviously apply the most rigorous protections that we can to the information that we receive. Well,
as you can imagine, access to House data is something that we all, Republicans, Democrats, guard very closely. However, we also recognize GAO's expertise in this area and hope congressional entities are cooperating so that we achieve the desired aim of the annual report. So thank you again. Another question, Mr. Marinos, we've seen attacks on our critical infrastructure, including the one earlier this year on the Colonial Pipeline, as mentioned in earlier testimony. Monitoring is critical to thwart future attacks. However, monitoring is not the end of what our efforts should be, and we should have a layered approach to cybersecurity, especially when protecting our nation's most vital infrastructure assets. Can you tell us, and this may be a question for DOT also, Mr. Schachtel, what's the Department of Transportation doing to fortify our critical assets in the field, such as air traffic control towers, pipelines, and railroads that are carrying hazardous materials or passengers, and so that they can operate effectively when malicious actors have already compromised the integrity of the network? Let's just go to you, Mr. Schachtel. Can you answer that with the time I have left?
Sure. Thank you very much for the question. So DOT in each of the areas that you mentioned is working with our private sector partners to improve their cybersecurity practices. And as stated before, our cooperation through TSA to those private sector partners, we act as co-sector risk management officials in those areas. So we need the participation from all those parties to become more cyber secure.
Well, we continue to offer to work with you on these endeavors, and I apologize for mispronouncing your name earlier, Mr. Schachter. Thank you all for being here today, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for your time and your testimony today. During part one of this hearing, we learned how our critical infrastructure remains vulnerable to cyber attacks. And in October of 2021, the DOT's OIG released a report on the Federal Transit Administration's cybersecurity weaknesses, which found that weaknesses in FTA's financial management systems could affect its ability to disperse COVID-19 funds. In Atlanta, the Metropolitan Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority has been anticipating $284 million in emergency funding, which is critical to the mobility of our residents, especially communities of color and essential workers who disproportionately depend on transit to get to work and school. My constituents can't afford a delay in funding because of a cybersecurity incident. The OIG report notes that the FTA has failed to fix weaknesses that have been known since 2016, a total of 5 years. While the delay is not unique to FTA, it puts us all at risk. Mr. Dorsey, why has FTA moved so slowly to implement security control fixes?
Thank you for your question, Congressman. We've worked with the department for a number of years regarding the various cybersecurity weaknesses that we've identified through our reviews of the various, what we call system level reviews. And with respect to FTA, what the department had informed us was the fact that they had accepted the risk for a number of reasons regarding why they had these long-standing weaknesses. One of the reasons was primarily because they said they had to get the proper guidance at the department level with respect to addressing some of the weaknesses. Another reason was the fact that they had stated that they were concerned about decommissioning their systems or upgrading their systems for the fear that the systems needed to be operational 24/7. With those issues in mind, we decided to report out on those particular weaknesses. And what the FTA decided to do after we had reported out, they indicated to us that they would take the immediate actions to address our concerns.
Well,
however, regarding the issues regarding the vulnerabilities associated with the 6 years or so associated with outdated databases, the department had indicated to us that they would provide us with a response by 2023.
Well, let me ask you, is there anything that Congress needs to do to ensure that FTA maintains better control over their cybersecurity?
I believe that what Congress can do is work with the department and maybe provides a sprint initiative, if you will, and require them to make sure that they prioritize the implementation of what we consider to be some of the most significant cybersecurity weaknesses that we've identified over the years, and make sure that they follow up with Congress and report on their attempts and efforts to address those weaknesses.
Thank you. Mr. Schachter, as the Chief Information Officer at DOT, you lead on IT and cybersecurity issues. How can you ensure that DOT's component agencies such as FTA and FAA have the resources, capabilities, and leadership to correct current cybersecurity deficiencies so that cities like Atlanta are not detrimentally impacted?
Well, thank you very much for that question. And as I specified in my testimony, cybersecurity is our #1 priority. And I highlighted 3 areas that we're prioritizing within that to take immediate action. The first is access control. The second is website security. And the third is governance and coordination across DOT. All of those issues are involved in the situations that you mentioned and Mr. Dorsey has mentioned. We've created cyber sprints that I also referenced in my testimony as a way to expedite improved performance in all of these areas. And I believe we'll be able to report back to you later this year that we have made significant improvements.
Thank you. My time is up and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Mr. Babin.
Sir, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I said the other week when we had witnesses from the private sector here, I'm so glad that we're having this hearing and prioritizing this very important topic. For this committee to weigh in on the issue of cybersecurity in the transportation and critical infrastructure space, it's a great responsibility and one we should all take very, very seriously. It's also a very timely topic. Right before we went home for Thanksgiving, the director of CISA told the House Homeland Security Committee that, quote, ransomware has become the scourge on nearly every facet of our lives. It's a prime example of the vulnerabilities that are emerging as our digital and our physical infrastructure increasingly converge. She went on to say that, quote, "The American way of life faces serious risks." She's right. Internet attacks are a full-fledged standard feature of our modern-day life. Hardly a day passes anymore without a media story breaking about a cyber attack or at least a threat. These threats are disruptive, costly, potentially life-threatening. All of us saw what happened with the Colonial Pipeline breach last May and how the attack led to gas shortages and interrupted supply chains. There's certainly a legitimate and appropriate role for us in the federal government to play in protecting the American people and our companies and businesses against theft, espionage, and cyber attacks. No question that each of you testifying here today are fighting for our national security. However, as you all know, cyber intrusions are very hard to track. We've got to be extraordinarily careful as lawmakers and as rule makers that we don't meddle into something that we don't properly understand and unintentionally create more bloated regulation or stifle innovation with overly burdensome requirements that don't truly secure our infrastructure. Any policy that we push forward has got to be aggressive, but are consistent with our nation's founding principles. Meanwhile, we provide for the common defense while at the same time protecting civil liberties and free economic markets. Former Director of National Intelligence and my former Texas colleague and classmate, John Ratcliffe, said that we need to attribute these attacks and either overtly or covertly retaliate against those responsible, thereby creating a deterrent for the future. If our long-term strategy to cyber criminals is just to simply pay the ransoms and hope for the best with cyber insurance, we will certainly lose to our foes in this new battlefront. So my question for you all is this, and I'll open this to anyone who would like to answer, time permitting. What are some common sense steps we as lawmakers can take to help you, our partners in the executive branch, better protect our infrastructure and to encourage better reporting of cyber threats without infringing on people's civil liberties and the free market? I'll open that up.
Thank you for that.
Congressman, go ahead. I'll yield to my colleague at DOT.
Okay, then Admiral, you can come on second. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you, Admiral. I'll try to be brief. I think your one summary of your statement, Congressman, is that cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility, public sector and private sector, and we're all going to either succeed or fail at this together. And I think from a congressional standpoint, it's understanding that new systems or improvements to existing systems need to be secure by design and created with cybersecurity in mind at step one. That would help us achieve our objectives. Thank you.
Thank you. Admiral?
Congressman, thank you. I support the comments made by Mr. Schachter there at DOT. What I would offer as well, though, is that we have to treat cybersecurity as an operational imperative, and it has to be part of an overall risk management approach within both the private sector and the federal government. And so I think that, in order to achieve that, you have to have an accountable person. They have to be able to do an assessment and understand the risk. They have to be empowered to manage those risks. And then it also comes back to exercising and reporting. Where it comes to reporting, right now, we have to change the paradigm from what is the minimum I need to disclose to how can I help protect others? Because as we've heard through testimony already, these incidents cut across so many different infrastructures, and reporting really helps us to make us all stronger, Congressman.
Absolutely. Thank you so very much. And I hope that we will remember retaliation can curtail some of this. I will yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. At this time, I will yield to myself. Mr. Grossman, the aviation sector is composed of aircraft, airlines, airports, and aviation operators such as air traffic control personnel and ground crew. As you know, it's a mix of private sector companies and public agencies, including the FAA. However, a cyber attack on one portion of this sector can have cascading effects on the entire system with devastating impacts to the public. Can you describe from a cybersecurity perspective how the FAA assists and supports the aviation sector?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question, Congressman. You know, the FAA engages with industry on several fronts. We are a regulator and a collaborator. So from a collaboration perspective, we engage with much of the aviation community through efforts like the Aviation ISAC, which we're close partners with, the Aviation Sector Coordinating Council, manufacturers, associations, and of course, through our primary engagement, the ACI, the Aviation Cyber Initiative. You know, in these engagements, we share best practices and standards, guidance, and we promote information sharing. As a regulator, we work directly with manufacturers and, you know, industry standards to assure that these two are kind of married up, and so folks are using industry standards and you know, and are building products that are appropriate.
So in defending the aviation sector from various cyber crimes, do you believe it is important to coordinate and even cooperate with the private sector to assist them?
Well, I think, you know, as Mr. Schachter mentioned earlier, cybersecurity is a team sport, and, you know, we're all in this together. Public and private sector work together, which is really why we formed the Cyber Initiative for aviation itself across the entire ecosystem, so that we can work more collaboratively with operators, manufacturers, other agencies, you know, private and public sectors work together to share information and to try to improve the resiliency of the ecosystem.
So this is for the entire panel. Where do you see the biggest cyber threats coming from specific actors like the recent attacks on local governmental entities with ransomware, from foreign entities, from non-state actors? Are there significant threats from even some of our own weaknesses, like our failure to update and strengthen our cyber infrastructure, or poor cyber hygiene, and failure to apply strict cybersecurity protocols? What are your insights?
Oh, Congressman, I think you just listed them all. I think I don't know that any of us, I don't want to speak for the rest of the panel, would highlight one over the other. I mean, you know, we're all aware of the recent compromise of SolarWinds that occurred last year, but there are other threats out there, and I think you know, that compromise is certainly still fresh in our minds, but you know, I wouldn't choose that actor over other actors or other vulnerabilities if you were asking me which is worse.
But I'd like to just mention that I think it has come up several times, both from the witnesses and from the congressmen as well. It's the interdependencies between the critical infrastructure that make this so challenging. So we're talking about transportation, and transportation not only relies on other sectors to operate effectively, but other sectors rely on it as well. We issued a report just last month on the communications sector, and the transportation sector was one of those sectors that had been identified by CISA as one it depended on. In other words, it could not operate without it. And so I think the challenge there is, you know, while there is resiliency built in many ways to physical attacks, the cyber attacks continue to show us that we need to do more to not only shore up specific sectors, but the entire nation's approach to cybersecurity as well, which is why we emphasized in our recent work the importance of having a national cyber strategy so that it can be an all-in-government effort to elevate our cyber capabilities within the nation.
Thank you all. Mr. Graves of Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the witnesses testifying today, and appreciate the importance of this topic. We've offered a number of amendments trying to increase funds for different cybersecurity programs related to infrastructure, and I think this is critically important. Ms. Woodward and perhaps Admiral, your testimonies discuss information sharing between TSA and the Coast Guard to identify and manage threats in the maritime transportation system. How do you communicate the threats to the individual ports and to help them? And how do you help to manage risk within the MTS?
Congressman, thanks for that question. So unity of effort within the Coast Guard is part of our DNA. And so we take a multi-level approach to share information at the speed of cyber here with the industry. But this is a dynamic threat environment. And going forward, we need to use a combination of both existing tools and new tools or new methods to get after the information sharing. So for this multi-level approach at the local level, we work through our area maritime security committees. Each of those have established cyber subcommittees that are responsible for that day-to-day sharing of information, for conducting the exercises, for reviewing best practices and understanding how to move forward. Those same people then are integral to response efforts when they occur in the ports. At the national level, we work through a number of different means. We've established a maritime cyber readiness branch within our Coast Guard Cyber that really becomes a focal point for threat information, dissemination, technical assistance to the field, and connection to the interagency. We've embedded folks in CISA. We meet regularly with the other sector risk management agencies. We engage with the MTS Information Sharing and Analysis Center, and we look for every opportunity to continue to share information and communicate threats and understand the vulnerabilities out in this industry so we can protect the MTS.
Thank you. And TSA, anything to update there?
Thank you, Congressman. And to complement Admiral Mauger's information, I would like to say, yes, the United States Coast Guard has primacy in our nation's ports. However, TSA plays an important role to support the security of the maritime transportation system. To that end, we have actually developed the TSA exercise training program, which started, frankly, as a port step security training exercise program. It started in the maritime sector in the mid-2000s. We have grown that training and exercise program across all modes of transportation. The U.S. Coast Guard is an important partner where Admiral Mauger mentioned we can actually exercise at both a national and a local level. And if an entity is not able to participate, we do maintain all of those lessons learned and exercise information in an accessible system to thousands of local operators, first responders, and those law enforcement professionals who support the security of the nation's ports and other transportation modes. Congress also generously chartered the Surface Transportation Security Advisory Committee a few years ago. Amongst the members includes obviously our stakeholders, our private sector stakeholders representing a multitude of interests across all surface transportation modes. However, we also have 14 federal agencies that also serve on that committee as non-voting contributing members.
Ms. Newhouse, I think my concern is if we have a very active or a very live incident, the ability to quickly communicate and disseminate that information with the ports, I'm not sure that the security committees or the apparatus that you're describing allows for that direct and sort of nimble communication to the ports and other potential threatened entities out there. And that's where my concern is. I just have about 45 seconds left. I want to ask one other question of the Coast Guard. I'm going to follow up with y'all through questions for the record. But Admiral, can you tell me whether or not y'all are working with FEMA to update the NIMS system to be able to track and follow through on cyber incidents?
Congressman, in terms of, first of all, communication with the ports, we have 24-hour watches that have access to the information and share that information, but look forward to your questions and follow-up questions. With regard to incident response, we stand up at the local level a unified command, which is a structure that was established under NIMS to be able to respond to incidents, and we can be happy to provide more information about that in follow-up or later during this hearing if you'd like.
That would be great. And maybe NIMS isn't the perfect system, but it seems like there needs to be some type of mechanism like that for tracking accountability. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're back.
Gentleman yields back. Ms. Titus.
Thank you very much. I'd like to go back and follow up on some of Mr. Carson's comments about coordinating with the private sector. Mr. Grossman, you mentioned the ISACs. I think one area that y'all didn't talk about the coordination is in commercial space. We've been hearing a lot about these billionaire joy rides to outer space, but we know that that's an important industry. It can help us take products up to the space station or launch satellites. It's a good potential use there. And there are a variety of companies that are starting to get into this. And I think that that increases the potential for cyber threats. I wonder if you could talk about how these ISACs work, if you're looking at cyber threats, how we coordinate with the commercial space industry.
Congressman, Congresswoman, apologize. Thank you for your question. Unfortunately, that doesn't fall under my purview. However, I understand FAA's Office of Commercial Space is heavily involved in the development of the space cybersecurity policies and assisted development of the ISAC and the Space Policy Directive. That directive established key cybersecurity principles to guide and serve as a foundation for U.S. approach to cyber protection of space systems. I could certainly follow up with you, though, to get more information on your question.
I would appreciate that because I realize it's not directly under what you do, but you do a lot of things all around that area. And I think it's something that's worth bringing to the attention of the committee because it's going to become increasingly an issue as we do more of this private space adventures, I guess. I would ask Ms. Newhouse, I know you were instrumental in setting up the whole pre-check program, so you're very informed on how this works and you got it off the ground, and we've seen it expand. Now the line for pre-check is longer than the regular line, I think. But one of the things that we've heard in areas that are with rural communities is that they have a hard time actually coming in person to get the pre-check clearance. So there's some attempt to move to remote applications. Could you talk about that and how that data that could be collected remotely can also be protected? And do you need legislation for that? Or is it something you can just do internally or through regulation?
Thank you for your question, Congresswoman, and thank you very much for your support of the TSA PreCheck program. We greatly appreciate the insights that Congress and all of our stakeholders give us on a daily basis. I can say at a very high level, I do know that the program that runs that program for TSA has endeavored to expand enrollment capabilities, as you mentioned, Congresswoman, and we're actually in progress of bringing on additional contract support, different vendors to do that in a secure manner. I'm happy to get back to you and your staff with specific answers to those questions on how we are best requiring protection of that information and how we will oversee that information. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I'd appreciate that. You know, so much of our information is shared in an airport, whether it's through TSA or just plug it in while you're waiting for your flight or even on the flight itself. So I think that to be sure that this is all secure information in the screening process, because the trip begins when you get out of the car at the airport. We want that to all work well, and we want people to feel secure that that information can't be compromised. So I look forward to getting that from you, and I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentlewoman yields back. The chair now recognizes Mr. Weber for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I appreciate that. I want to talk a minute about pipelines. I appreciated Garrett Graves' comments about ports, and we'll tie these together. As y'all all know, the Colonial Pipeline System was hacked into I think it was May of this year and was down for 4 or 5 days. Feeds the southeastern United States, moves about 2.5 million barrels of product a day, which is gasoline, jet fuel, excuse me, diesel. Extremely important to our infrastructure, obviously energy infrastructure. We would argue national security infrastructure because we're going to need fuel to move our military stuff. The Keystone Pipeline comes into our district. It has about 1/3 of the output. Without any redundancy of a Keystone Pipeline or more pipelines to carry stuff, and many of y'all probably know pipelines have a 99% safety rating in it. All that just with them, they move product the most efficiently and most safely. All that to say that from an energy perspective, with vulnerability to being hacked, would it sound like we ought to have a system in place to notify either pipeline operators? I would add ports to it, like Congressman Graves did, as well as other ways that we move energy. Since we have limited time now, I know we talked about doing it at the speed of cyber speed, so to speak, but should there be a process in place to where the greatest amount of energy is protected as early on as possible? I don't know, is that a possible, Mr. Shacker, I'll go to you. Is that something that sounds, number one, a good idea, and number two, possible?
Thank you for that question. If I understand it correctly, we're talking about coordination and communication between the private sector partners that provide the energy, the fuels, the pipeline operators, as well as the government in its regulatory capacity.
Correct.
And I believe
and with ports, let me also say ports too, because our country runs on, the economy of our country is important, runs on trade. So let's not leave the ports out.
Okay, so the same principles will apply in my answer. Thank you.
Right.
TSA has moved aggressively to improve information sharing and incident reporting from all of those private sector actors, and to coordinate with both DOT and other government regulatory bodies that have an interest in those areas. As you probably know, ports as well as the pipelines are also privately operated, so that we have to work with those private sector partners and try to influence them and advise them to improve their own cybersecurity practices to protect their systems so they're less likely to be attacked. Some of that is standard IT access control, but it also moves into operational technology, which are very specialized and outside the realm of DOT information technology.
But if we had a system to catch that, I know we monitor a lot of stuff, and be able to communicate that as quickly as possible. I know there was a discussion about banks here some years back, since I've been in Congress, same thing. But if we had a system in place where we could at least be I don't know what the right term is, co-managing partner, or have a process, and I'm going to move on to the Admiral next, whereby if we know something is in the making, we can alert them as quickly as possible and thereby protect our infrastructure in terms of energy, national security, and the marketplace, if you will. Admiral, what do you think? Sounds like a good idea?
Congressman, intelligence and understanding what's happening to the threat level is really a critical piece of how we collectively protect the nation. And so we've established procedures by which we can share information rapidly, but both through the interagency, down to our field units, and in several cases with the private sector through our area maritime security committees. What we're also finding out, though, is that this is a very broad problem, And so it's important that we get together and collaborate at the lowest level possible. CISA has established a joint cyber defense collaborative that's bringing private sector and the interagency together at a low level to be able to see those threats and challenges as they evolve and share those out rapidly and put the mitigations in place. And so this is an important issue, and we're getting after it.
Well, thank you for that. And Madam Chair, I cannot see the clock. How much time do I have?
The gentleman's time has expired.
Well, let me just end with one quick thing for Ms. Newhouse for the TSA. If you can prevent the random disappearance of my wife's TSA number on her airline tickets, it would be worth everything to me in Congress. But I appreciate what y'all.
We are happy to help. If you have any questions or any members here have questions about TSA PreCheck or your family members, please let me know, and I am happy to make sure we solve any issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. Ms. Brownlee is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first question is to Mr. Dorsey. Mr. Dorsey, in October, your office issued a disturbing report about IT security weaknesses at the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. You placed malware in the network, and the agency failed to detect it. So I was curious to know, is this a practice that you do in other agencies? Why was this particular agency selected for this exercise? I'm sort of curious of the thought process behind it.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman, for your question. Throughout our reviews on an annual basis, we've issued a number of audits with respect to our vulnerability assessments and penetration testing work of the department's IT infrastructure to determine whether or not the department has established secure practices to protect and secure its IT infrastructure. Our review of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration was not our first review of the department's IT infrastructure. As a matter of fact, it was the third review. We initially started back in 2016 and issued a report on Volpe Centers, the department's research arm, and we followed that up with a review of the department's MARAD Association. And Federal Motor Carriers was just the third in a series of reviews that we're planning to do with respect to assessing the department's security posture at all of its operating administrations. We just initiated another review of the Federal Highway Administration's IT infrastructure. And what we're doing that for is to determine whether or not the department is instituting the proper controls, enforcing oversight of their own policies that they have in place. What we've identified is just primarily persistent security weaknesses that has provided us with a path to actually compromise the department's IT infrastructure.
Did the Federal Highway Administration fare better?
We just initiated that review. We normally take about 7 to 10 months to complete our reviews, and we'll be reporting out on the status of that review at that time. But what we have found in the past is just primarily persistent weaknesses in basic things, such as a lack of strong passwords, unpatched or what we consider to be software that is not updated in various operating systems. We find a lack of encryption in data, and those persistent weaknesses is how we primarily were able to penetrate the department's IT infrastructure.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Schechter, I know you've only been in the department. In your opening comments, you said you've been there for 3 months, certainly 11 years in the city of New York. And I guess, you know, I would just like to ask you, how would you what grade would you give yourself at this particular point? Would it be an A, a B, a C, a D, an F? How would you grade yourself right now?
Well, thank you for the question. I don't have enough information yet to provide that sort of an assessment. What I can tell you, and as Mr. Dorsey mentioned, some of those audit findings do go back to 2016, before DOT created a central operating environment for the purpose of addressing across DOT some of the very same findings that OIG found in multiple modes related to access control, vulnerability and patch management, that the common operating environment gives us much better tools to provide that security across all the modes at DOT who use this common operating environment. So our performance has already improved, but we have a ways to go. And we're transparently acknowledging that, as I did in my opening statement. And I think pardon me?
Well, I just wanted to go on to another question because I only have a few more seconds
Sure.
left. So you've also mentioned, limited resources several times in your answers today. And so I'm wondering, do you have enough resources to do what you think you need to do? And if not, are you planning on making further budget requests in the 2023 budget cycle?
Thank you for that question as well. I'm still too new to the position to fully assess whether we have sufficient resources as needed to address this, or the resources in the right place or with the right expertise. And I expect before too long to be able to share that that information.
Thank you, sir. My time is up. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. The gentlewoman yields back. The chair now recognizes Mr. Burchett for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Lady. This is for Rear Admiral Malger. How do you say your name, sir? Is it Malger or Malger?
It's Mauger, Congressman. Thank you.
All right. You can call me Tim. Semper Paratus, I believe, is your all's motto, if I'm correct. I'm really concerned about the Russian efforts to target the undersea fiber optic cables that carry 99% of U.S. communications abroad, many of which are operated by private companies. I understand that a lot of information about undersea cable system is classified, but given the Coast Guard's role in protecting the marine transportation system, can you comment on our nation's ability to prevent and respond to cyber attacks against our undersea cable infrastructure?
Congressman, our maritime transportation critical infrastructure is varied, and it's dependent on other modes of critical infrastructure. And as you've highlighted, there are very substantial threats against the maritime critical infrastructure every day. And so that's why we've put together, that's why we've operationalized our cybersecurity and made it part of our prevention and response framework to make sure that we're getting after this threat at the speed and pace at which it demands. I can offer you a follow-up brief with regard to cables if you'd like, sir.
I would really like that. Just out of curiosity, how many ribbons are on your chest?
Congressman, I don't even know how many ribbons are on my chest here. So maybe I can get you that answer for the record.
That's all right. No, it's very distracting, but I think it's pretty cool. Thank you, brother, for serving our country. I always remember a buddy of mine, Ron Eisenberg, back home, who's a coastie, and I always remember at the Veterans Day celebration that everybody gets up and sings their service anthems or create whatever. And, my daddy was an old Marine. Of course, he'd sing the Marine Corps hymn. And there was always just one coastie in all of Knox County that would get up and sing. And he would just scream it out in the back because he'd be by himself. And I always thought that was pretty cool. But thank you. Hey, this is for Mrs. Newhouse, the TSA. I won't get after you for the terrible service sometimes I see people get, because in Knoxville, Tennessee, actually the group is pretty good. I always gripe about the one up here in D.C., which is, in my opinion, pretty lackluster. But a couple of months ago, the TSA announced plans to issue new cybersecurity regulations for rail and airline companies. Now, how much time did your all's agency give the impacted stakeholders to respond and provide feedback on those directives?
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you for recognizing our fine transportation security officers, particularly in Tennessee. We're very proud of them, and they're frankly amongst our top performing airports and officers in the country. So thank you for that compliment. With respect to the rail and higher risk rail and rail transit directives, along with the aviation security program changes, actually we've followed a very robust rubric of engagement. I will give you the example for aviation. We utilize existing security requirements and programs and provided ample notice and comment, both verbally and in writing, in multiple sessions. And we have also, as I mentioned in my opening to Ranking Member Graves, we've taken that feedback and updated definitions of a reportable cybersecurity incident. So we've taken that seriously. With respect to my rail partners, as I mentioned earlier in my testimony, we have embarked on a robust engagement at the CEO level, starting with Secretary Mayorkas, Administrator Pekoski, amongst many other DHS senior officials, along with our CISA partners, to engage both at the classified level and the unclassified level to describe the known, ongoing, and persistent threats that are driving these policies. We then provided written copies to the regulated parties to have an opportunity to review these, albeit in certain circumstances, we do need to act swiftly given the persistent threats. However, what we have done, and particularly over this last month, I can personally tell you from my office, the standpoint, we have engaged extensively over these last 4 weeks and have updated based on those feedbacks, particularly from our rail partners. Thank you.
Has your agency received any concerns from the stakeholders about how the upcoming cybersecurity directives would impact their current operations?
Thank you, Congressman. Yes, everything we do every day is about continuous improvement. And one of those areas of continuous improvement is to first do no harm and actually complement operations while securing those operations. So we have heard a number of concerns to ensure that all operators, large and small, can apply these cybersecurity measures in an effective and efficient manner. So we do take that into consideration, and we continue to elicit feedback. We're not just done when we issue the documents. It's a continuous feedback loop and improvement, and we stand committed to that.
Thank you. I've run out of time, and I yield none of my time back to you, Chair Lady. Thank you.
The gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes Mr. Payne for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Ms. Newhouse, I'm going to contact you outside of this hearing with some respects to pre-check at Newark International Airport. I received some documents from flyers that flew into Newark that had an issue with the pre-check, but I will do that at a later time. Under the Rail Safety Improvement Act of 2028, Congress mandated railroads that carried hazardous materials and passengers to install positive train control systems. Positive train control systems work to prevent unsafe movements and accidents by using an information network to regulate trains' positions. Can you elaborate on the new TSA directive concerning cybersecurity in passenger and freight rail? And how will this directive help secure PTC systems?
Thank you for your question, Congressman, and we look forward to receiving the inquiry regarding TSA PreCheck. We're happy to help. With respect to the new rail security directives that we've just worked with our partners to implement, really with respect to positive train control and any other operational or informational technology systems, those directives apply to all of it. And if I may, we have focused very heavily on reporting. We have to know even anything that could really reasonably impact those operations, whether it is PTC or other IT or OT systems. So the early warning and indicators are critical. So that is part of the strategy with these new directives, is to designate that coordinator, have a 24/7 availability to report those incidents to CISA. As Admiral Mauger mentioned, CISA has what we call a clearinghouse, CISA Central. in addition to multiple, and we don't forestall any other reporting requirements or reporting channels that operators may have to independent operating agencies, but CISA Central sits at the center of the United States government to maintain that information and disseminate it fast. Can go at the national level down to the local level. Again, with respect to any IT and OT system, we are requiring these rail operators to develop a cybersecurity incident response plan. We're working with them. We're doing that in concert with all of the modal administrations at DOT. We want to make sure that our folks in the field, as you're well familiar with them, have that information and have that at hand. Last two, we're asking the operators to conduct self-assessments and identify vulnerabilities and gaps and have us help them close those gaps. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Marino, good cyber hygiene is critical to keeping our cyber transportation infrastructure safe and operational. Federal agencies must not be exempt from adhering to cyber hygiene standards. As chairman of the Railroads, Pipelines, and Hazardous Materials Subcommittee, I have a responsibility to ensure that the Federal Railroad Administration meets the evolving threat of cyber attacks. How can Congress better assist agencies such as FRA to develop and keep good cyber hygiene practices?
Congressman Payne, I think the best method of doing that is your continued support of the Inspectors General community as well as to GAO in the audits that we conduct. It's extremely helpful and productive, in particular, to have Congress's support not only during our audits but also following them when it comes to recommendations that we've made. And so we're grateful for that support. I think the important thing when it comes to, in particular, smaller entities is to ensure that those departments and agencies that they are a part of have the capability to monitor the performance themselves. And likewise, at the more central level, OMB and the federal CIO and federal CISO offices are doing everything they can to likewise give feedback to big and small agencies and what they need to do to get better at cybersecurity.
I think I thank you for that answer, and Madam Chair, I'll yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes Mr. Balderson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first question is to Mr. Grossman. Mr. Grossman, good morning, first of all. Last year, the GAO offered 6 recommendations to the FAA to strengthen its avionics cybersecurity oversight program. The GAO report found that evolving cyber threats and increasing connectivity between airplanes and other systems could put future flight safety at risk if the FAA doesn't prioritize oversight. Can you discuss what the FAA is doing to ensure these networks and systems are secure from cyber threats?
Good morning or good afternoon, Congressman. Thank you for the question. FAA looks really at the whole system of the airplane, once an avionic equipment is installed to assure that there's proper procedures and protections. The avionics GAO audit that you referenced, the GAO issued 6 recommendations. We have already proposed closure on 2. 2 of those, 3 of those are scheduled for closure in March, and just 1 we non-concurred with. So we welcomed that audit and made some significant changes.
Okay, thank you. One of the recommendations that the GAO made, which the FAA did not concur with, was to consider revising its policies and procedures for periodic independent testing. Can you discuss why the FAA disagreed with this recommendation?
Absolutely, sir. It was independent testing on aircraft that are currently flying in the fleet today. And we were concerned that independent testing or penetration testing is how we had discussed with the GAO on aircraft that are in the fleet, that are active aircraft, could leave residual damage to the avionics systems and affecting safety.
Okay, thank you. And I have one more follow-up for you. Just has the FAA developed a avionics cybersecurity training program?
an avionics cybersecurity training program.
Yes.
I'm not aware of what we have developed, but I can certainly look into that and get back to you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Mr. Marinos, thank you for joining us this afternoon. In December of 2020, GAO reported that none of the 23 agencies in its review had fully implemented key foundational practices for managing information and communications technology supply chains. Since 2010, GAO has made nearly 80 recommendations to enhance infrastructure cybersecurity. As of November, nearly 50 of those recommendations have not been implemented. While we don't have time to go over all of these recommendations, could you please discuss which of these unimplemented recommendations should be given priority?
Yes, Congressman, I appreciate you pointing out the importance of the recommendations that we have outstanding. In addition to the recommendations that we made within that specific avionics report that you mentioned earlier in your questioning, I believe that the top recommendations with respect to critical infrastructure include making sure that federal agencies that have sector-specific responsibilities are doing everything they can to assess what the cyber risks are to their respective sectors, put forward plans with stakeholder engagement that makes sense on how they're going to support those sectors, and then execute. To put it very carefully, most of those recommendations really express that in a variety of different ways across sectors that extend beyond transportation to include things like the grid, K through 12, financial services, and other sectors as well. We also think it's very important for CISA to continue its effort to reach its full potential. When Congress passed the law in 2018 establishing CISA, the agency that grew out of NPPD took on a large set of activities that it had challenged itself to complete by the end of 2020. Unfortunately, a report that we issued earlier this year showed that they were not able to achieve quite a few of the important activities related to workforce planning, incident response, identifying essential functions. These are activities that CISA needs to complete as quickly as possible. And we've heard from CISA that there is intent to do many of those things either by the end of this year or next. The urgency is there for that organization to gain its full potential to be able to provide support both to infrastructure and to federal agencies as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Madam Chair, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes Mr. Malinowski for 5 minutes. It looks like Mr. Malinowski might not be on. Mr. Carter, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Greatly appreciate the opportunity. Thank you so much to our participants, Mr. Marinos and Mr. Dorsey. Both of your organizations have provided a lot of oversight of federal government cybersecurity strengths and weaknesses. Have either of your organizations looked at how prepared or vulnerable agencies are to potential cybersecurity attacks, specifically around the time of natural disasters? As you know, my district in Louisiana suffered a substantial storm, one of the largest ever. And my fear is, as we know that hurricanes come every year, the intensity increases. And my fear is that our critical infrastructure is particularly vulnerable during those periods. Can you share with me your thoughts on ideas and or practices to protect our critical infrastructure during natural disasters?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Congressman. And I think that you noted in the previous hearing that the National Association of State CIOs had also identified that as a real threat. And so I think it does speak to just how important it is to consider not only when we can be strong at our most resilient state, but also at our weakest points, which can come often with natural disasters. What I would say is over the course of the last several decades, GAO has been tasked by Congress to look specifically at how federal agencies are preparing themselves for man-made or natural disasters through continuity of operations activities. And a key part of continuity planning is to ensure the continual availability of information. And you can't do that without thinking about cybersecurity as well. I think that's probably a very important part of looking at any cybersecurity program at a federal agency is its ability to recover from disasters. I'm not sure if Mr. Dorsey may have more specific DOT related examples to provide, but I'm happy to pass it over to him.
Thank you for the question, Congressman. And thank you, GAO. Just wanted to state that we have just recently initiated a review of the department's high value assets. And what we found is that the department's high value assets program is heavily reliant on the Department of Homeland Security efforts to work with the department in assessing the department's high value assets. The department has identified 21 high value assets. From our understanding, there has been at least 4 assessments since the Department of Homeland Security has actually initiated its review of DOT's programs. And we're planning to continue our work over the next several months to determine what the actual governance process is that the department has in place, as well as whether or not they are actually taking the initial steps required to assess and remediate the potential for a threat of any of those high value assets.
How do you disseminate that information with local governments or states so that they're equipped for future instances? I understand you guys have several practices or studies that are ongoing trying to determine best practices. How do you disseminate information so local governments are better prepared?
Our job is primarily to report directly to the department heads as well as Congress, and how that information is disseminated down to the state and local level. I don't have.
Mr. Marinos, could you respond to that, sir?
Yes, sir. I think that falls on the shoulders of CISA. You know, we've seen CISA develop its capabilities, especially when it comes to the support it can provide to state and local governments and to owners and operators that may not have capabilities to do things like assess their own capabilities. Those are offerings and services that CISA has. You know, one thing that we've seen is as an important need for CISA to continue its outreach across the board, whether they're big or small operators, so that there is awareness about what the federal government can do ahead of time so that it can prepare itself to be resilient in the event of a situation like you described, where natural disaster may coincide with a cyber attack.
It'd be very helpful if you would share with us information that we might be able to share with our local governments and states on what to do in the case of hurricanes or wildfires. You could imagine the devastation if someone took control of our apparatus and we were not able to dispatch emergency EMS or fire equipment. These are real life issues that unfortunately are becoming far too frequently experienced with local and state government. So thank you very much for your time and attention. Any information that you can share with us on how we as a committee can do better or push buttons further to provide resources or awareness so this information is gotten out and we're able to be prepared for future instances. As we know, unfortunately, they're becoming far too common. I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman yields. Chair recognizes Mr. Fitzpatrick for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Newhouse, thank you for being with us today.
Let's lighten it on a big screen.
When the Colonial Pipeline suffered their ransomware attack in May, we saw the grave impacts on our nation and our infrastructure. TSA's directives to require reporting and incident report plans were needed. In 2020, the average estimated time to identify a breach was over 200 days. So my first question is, what more is being done by your agency to identify cyber attacks in a quicker fashion?
Thank you for your support and your question, Congressman. Actually, with respect to those security directives to the pipeline industry, we require reporting of the incidents within 12 hours. And that is because of the criticality of our nation's pipelines, the fact that they carry the majority of the significant effects that they would have if those were attacked, because they carry the majority of the resources needed to run this country. So that's why we were very forward-leaning in establishing that immediate time frame. And we have since also updated that definition, as I have mentioned, of what is a reportable cybersecurity incident in collaboration with industry.
Secondly, it's been found that well over 80% of breaches are financially motivated. And the average ransomware payment rose over a third in 2020 from 2019 levels to over $100,000. Do you believe that American companies should continue to pay ransoms to bad actors? And if not, do you think that legislation would be needed to basically disincentivize, or if not, ban and make illegal ransom payments altogether and have a more of a federal program to address them?
As referenced earlier, CISA Director Easterly referenced ransomware as likely the highest level of malicious cyber activity. I would say that through the Department of Homeland Security, in CISA in particular, we work very closely with our law enforcement, the FBI, both federal and state and local law enforcement to identify those opportunities. I would say I would defer to my CISA colleagues on how we can best combat ransomware from a technical standpoint, in addition to the financial aspects as well. Happy to take that back and coordinate that for you, Congressman.
Thank you, Mr. Newhouse. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Chair recognizes Ms. Bordeaux for a period of 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. We have all seen the far-reaching negative implications of cybersecurity attacks on the transportation sector. For example, in May of 2021, the ransomware attack on the Colonial Pipeline resulted in more than 43% of gas stations in my home state of Georgia being out of gas. It's clear from today's testimony that more work needs to be done to strengthen cybersecurity protections in all areas of the transportation sector. Mr. Grossman, in your written testimony, you talk about the value of training through participation exercises or simulations. My district is home to Curiosity Lab at Peachtree Corners, which is a one-of-a-kind living lab designed to provide a real-world test environment to advance next-generation intelligent mobility and smart city technology. What kind of simulations do you run to prepare your staff for cybersecurity attacks? And could you talk a little bit about the benefits of those real-life simulations?
Absolutely, Congresswoman. Thank you very much for that question. We, as I mentioned in my oral testimony as well, we have developed a cyber test facility in Atlantic City at our William J. Hughes Technical Center that serves as kind of the cornerstone of some of our exercise activities. We regularly conduct incident response exercises that include both the mission support side or the normal IT side of FAA, as well as the operational side, or the NAS, the National Airspace System, excuse me. In addition to that, we conduct external exercises with DHS and all of government. There are cyber exercises. We have also conducted international exercises with the Caribbean, with Mexico, and several other countries. This year we've begun looking at cyber ranges so that we can actually inject real world, cybersecurity threat into our exercises so that we can get an actual look at what an actual attack would look like. Typically, when we simulate an exercise, it is just that.
Might have lost.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I might have lost you for a second there.
Apologize.
Okay. So just to follow up with that, Mr. Cordell at the DOT, are there similar types of exercises that you do that you could talk a little about, and what the value add is of having that kind of real life simulation?
Well, thank you for that question, because it gives me an opportunity to discuss actually one of the most effective and least expensive type of simulation exercises. And that's one where we send essentially a test email encouraging people to click on an unknown link, a technique called phishing. And what we see is, by repeating that on a regular basis, people get much smarter and become much more cautious about clicking on those links. And as was mentioned a little while ago, this is a prime way that malware gets introduced into enterprise environments unknowingly by people within the organization. So this is, as I said, a very effective, very inexpensive means of protecting and the network and providing greater access control.
Thank you very much. I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair recognizes Mr. Mass for a period of 5 minutes.
Thank you. Admiral, I'd love to start with you. Number one, thank you for your service in the United States Coast Guard. I very much appreciate that. I want to talk a little bit about this. If your men and women are physically attacked, do they return fire?
Congressman, we have a well-established, well-rehearsed, well-trained a process in place for use of force in the Coast Guard. It is not my area of expertise, and so if you want to go into that in more detail, I'd be happy to take that question for the record or set up a briefing for you.
Not a lot of detail, just really, just logically and commonsensically. If somebody puts a round, points the muzzle of a rifle at one of your men or women and depresses the trigger and moves around at a couple thousand feet per second towards one of your men and women, are they going to return fire?
Congressman, they will execute the Coast Guard use of force policy, and so if fired on by an adversary, they will fire back.
That's right. Like I said, that's not meant to be provocative, right? It's common sense that they will. Again, understanding you're not a shooter by your own admission. Do you think that they should shoot until they totally eliminate the threat? Just opinion. I'm looking for opinion on this. I understand you're not a shooter.
Congressman, I think that in the general sense, our folks need to ensure their own personal protection, ensure the protection of their colleagues, and ensure the protection of any members of the public as well. And so they will carry out and continue with use of force policy until that local Coast Guard's woman or man is ensure that things are safe.
Good. We should dispatch the threats, in my opinion. I've been a part of doing that in a different place. And I want to layer this on cyber attacks and cyber threats. And the reason that I asked that was to go and layer that on this question. Should we approach a cyber attack in the same way that we would approach a physical attack? Should we go out there? There's a moment that it turns from defending myself to going out there and seeking a violent course of action to dispatch the threat that is coming against me. And it becomes offensive, and that's not provocative. Should we be pursuing that in every instance of being shot at in form of cyber, that we dispatch that threat so that it can never again pose that threat to us again?
So, Congressman, as we move this into the cyber landscape, it's really important to understand that there are key differences. There's a big difference between attributing a shooter right in front of you using force against you that you can see and react to versus somebody in the cyberspace that might be working through a different adversary, or might be working through a different venue to get after you. So attribution in cyberspace is really critical. That said, the Coast Guard released a cyber strategic outlook in August that puts together 3 lines of effort. The first line of effort is about defending and operating our networks and DoD networks. The second one is about protecting the maritime transportation system. And we bring together the full spectrum of the prevention and response framework to protect the maritime transportation system. And then the third line of
do you believe in making that transition, however, from we were attacked, we are now assessing what happened from the attack, and we are now transitioning to offensive to eliminate where we assess the origin of that threat? If you can assess the origin of that threat, do you believe in becoming offensive against that threat?
Congressman, we are building with support from Congress in fiscal year 21 And with support from the administration in the FY22 President's budget, we are building out a cyber mission team capability that allows us to take full spectrum operations and effects, provided that we have the right authorities in place against adversaries. And so,
that's
this is
a
an
yes.
important part.
The full
This is an
spectrum
important part
meaning
of our strategy.
full spectrum meaning yes, you believe you should have that capability to transition to the offensive against where you believe a threat originated from.
Congressman, that is the key part of our 3 lines of effort in our strategic outlook. We're aligning our training under the joint DoD standards so that we can work closely with the Department of Defense to carry out what the nation needs from their forces.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes. Last month, we heard from industries on real-world challenges they face, and I look forward to speaking with our witnesses today on how the federal government can work with its private sector partners to protect and strengthen our digital infrastructure as well. This question is for first Mr. Dorsey and then Mr. Marinos in that order, please. My district in Massachusetts has 2 leaders, at least in the cybersecurity industry. Industrial Defender is headquartered in Foxborough, Massachusetts, and CyberArk in Newton. These companies work on security roadmaps and software to protect complex operational technology in line with NIST compliance. Has the DOT Inspector General's Office and/or the GAO looked at how federal agencies are interacting with companies like these and local transportation agencies? And do you have any recommendations for improving public-private coordination and cooperation? And these questions are first for Mr. Dorsey and then for Mr. Marinos.
Thank you for your question, Congressman. The Department of Transportation Office of Inspector General has not looked at that line of coordination, if you will. But what I will say is that as part of our annual assessments through FSMA, we do work with the department and ask them a series of questions from the standpoint of a supply chain risk management area. And what we do with that line of reasoning is just go back and determine whether or not the department has taken appropriate steps with respect to ensuring that any vendor-related software that they get is not associated with any type of counterfeit efforts or anything like that. And we also make a determination as to what extent does DOT ensure that products, system components, systems, and services of external providers are consistent with DOT cybersecurity policy. That's a new requirement that just has been incorporated in the IG FSMA metrics that we have to assess on an annual basis. Outside of that, that's how we go about communicating with the OMB, as well as how we report to Congress with respect to what the department's efforts are in that particular arena. Thank you.
Mr. Marinos?
Yes, so Congressman, 2 thoughts here. One, GAO was tasked by law to evaluate the adequacy of standards that the National Institute of Standards and Technology puts out, so NIST. And the biggest one in this area is the cybersecurity framework. And as part of the 4 reviews, we're actually wrapping up the 4th just in the next few months. We looked at how the cyber framework was pulled together, including what kind of engagement NIST had in doing a public exposure draft and receiving comments from outside stakeholders and then incorporate them into the framework. They've done this on a couple iterations of the framework, and they of course do it on other special publications as well. So we may not necessarily interact directly with organizations like those that you mentioned, but we certainly evaluate how NIST is taking in information from folks out there, the experts out there on cybersecurity, and whether they can use that to better the framework and the guidance that's being put out. And then the second thing I just mentioned too, though, is that GAO does engage quite often with state and local audit offices, including the Massachusetts State Audit Office as well. And that's been a really great opportunity because it gives us a chance to have a better sense of how effective federal guidance is within their capacity and what are sort of the threats and the landscape that they are also seeing state and local agencies have to combat as well.
Thank you to you both. The chair yields the balance of his time and recognizes Mr. Johnson for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, are you talking about Mr. Johnson of South Dakota?
Yes, sorry.
Very good. No, not a problem. All right. Well, I will start with Mr. Grossman. And Mr. Grossman, I recently had the opportunity to visit an air traffic control facility in Sioux Falls just a couple of weeks ago, and it was fantastic. Really dedicated people for sure. Sean Hennett and others showed me around, but I couldn't help but notice how antiquated some of the computer equipment was. There were some newer systems, but they seemed to be intermingled with some that were older than many of the folks working in the tower. And so give me some sense very quickly of the kind of challenges that we have keeping these systems safe when they are so antiquated.
Well, thank you for your question and appreciate your trip. I think from a cyber perspective, those systems, while they appear to be old, we are able to keep them secure. If you're asking about simply replacing those systems, I would have, that's really not in my area, but I would have to take your question back to our air traffic organization. But from a cybersecurity perspective, even though they appear old, they are certainly secure.
Okay, very good. I appreciate that. And maybe I'll shift gears now to Mr. Marinos. I listened with interest when you noted that GAO has made 3,000 recommendations for improving cybersecurity to federal agencies. And with even more interest when you noted that there are more than 900 of them that have not been implemented by those agencies. We haven't had a lot of discussion today about dams, which is under the jurisdiction of this committee. Sir, are you aware of any particular, and obviously the dam is critically important both from an electrical generation perspective as well as a flood control perspective for this country. Are you aware of any particular recommendations that have been made to the Department of Homeland Security vis-a-vis cybersecurity for our dam infrastructure that have not been implemented?
Actually, Congressman, sort of building off of the most recent question that I answered, the NIST cybersecurity framework obviously applies to all sectors. And so as part of the work of the series of 4 reviews we've done, we've actually gone out to DHS and the other now sector risk management agencies, and we've asked them whether their respective sectors are finding it useful. Are they adopting it? And so that would include the dam sector as well, their subsector as well. And so in those instances, we've seen that federal agencies are challenged, not only within that sector, within others, to be able to have that kind of dialogue with operators, big and small, within their respective sectors. There are a variety of reasons for that. One, there may simply not be the appropriate expertise at the operators to be able to interact, to provide that kind of feedback, even to be able to use the framework in the way that it's intended. It's a very expansive set of sort of, it's been sort of equated to like a grocery store that you can go in and pick and choose the cyber protections that you might want to implement. And so I think the important thing is for DHS to make sure that it's getting feedback from not only the dam sector, but others to make sure that the support and guidance it's providing is actually useful.
So, and I think that's helpful, but as you alluded to with your last answer, that is more comprehensive, right? It's across all impacted agencies. Does anything in particular stand out with regard to, we were talking about some of the antiquated IT systems in place for the FAA. I happen to know that that's also the case for the operations of the dam systems with Western Area Power Administration and others. Anything in particular that comes to mind with that subsector?
Absolutely, and it doesn't just relate to that specific sector, but as you point out, legacy systems, especially within operational technology, are something that operators need to be thinking about ahead, have a plan for how they intend to modernize. And as Larry pointed out, as Mr. Grossman pointed out, many of those systems may actually have, in some ways, better protections if they're air-gapped. In other words, if they're not connected to business systems, within those respective companies, they may be better suited for the sort of operational control activities that they do. But the reality is that, again, that connection to the federal government, how do those operators know what the greatest threats are? That's going to require a good amount of information sharing to and from to kind of know what the posture is within the dam sector, as an example.
Yeah, I think that's well said, sir. Has GAO indicated the investment gap as we talk about these legacy systems and the need to replace them? Has GAO estimated the size of that gap in dollars and cents? And could you point me toward a particular report that I could review to learn more?
Happy to share information from the federal agency side, and maybe that equates to the private sector. But the federal government continues to spend 80% of its IT budget on legacy activities, not on modernizing. And so I think that's an important aspect, as well as the DOT CIO mentioned, modernizing with security in mind from the beginning.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Malinowski for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to zoom out a bit, no pun intended, and talk about the future of transportation 5, 10, 15 years from now, and get into how the department is guarding against new and emerging threats. And then I'll ask Mr. Marinos for his reactions to I want to ask Mr. Schachter for his thoughts and Mr. Marinos for his reaction. I participated a few days ago in a tabletop exercise that simulated a hostile power taking down our GPS system, something that obviously would have incredibly dire implications even today for nearly all modes of transportation: air, rail, maritime, and more. In the consumer automobile context, some of America's largest companies, Tesla, Apple, Alphabet, are investing billions of dollars in autonomous vehicle technology. I was in a meeting just yesterday with Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Alphabet, which owns an autonomous driving startup, Waymo, and he reaffirmed his interest to us in bringing that technology to the market. So while there's no expert consensus on precisely when there will be widespread adoption of level 4, level 5 autonomy, I think it's safe to say that we're going to have a huge number of vehicles on the road, certainly by the 2030s, that are heavily or even exclusively reliant on artificial intelligence to make decisions about accelerating, braking, turning, every road decision. And in fact, today, every car is rolling off the assembly line packed with computers. Many have internet-based, internet-enabled entertainment systems that are pre-installed. And there's even more revolutionary technological change to come, including potentially cars that are charged by the highways that they drive on themselves. As all of you know, any product, device, or service that's connected to the internet or that's otherwise reliant on code is going to be vulnerable, potentially vulnerable to compromise. And the stakes are going to be incredibly high when we're talking about software-powered machines that are carrying people at 70 miles or more down the freeway. So, Mr. Schachter, recognizing your primary focus is on the internal IT management of the department, that you've only been on the job for a few months, and you're not personally writing the regulations related to autonomy or grid safety, I do want to ask you some big picture questions about how you and your colleagues are thinking about the threats that are around the corner. What cyber-related challenges does the department expect to encounter in 5, 10, 15 years? When the technologies that we're just talking about today become mainstream? What's going to keep your successor up at night? And what, if anything, are you doing now to prepare?
Well, thank you very much for that question. GPS and overall positioning, navigation, and timing are very important issues that DOT is studying in multiple places. The best example I can give you actually relates back to my experience in New York City, where we were one of the 3 national connected vehicle test locations through a Department of Transportation connected vehicle pilot program. And securely communicating with all of the test vehicles and standing up a security credential management system so that the vehicles were communicating for basic safety information like emergency braking, or even traffic signal phase warnings, like when you were about to approach a red signal, We wanted to be sure, and the federal government wanted us to be sure, that all of those transmissions were from authenticated actors, and nobody was spoofing actors and potentially causing harm to either the people operating vehicles or other road users as well. So that's a future technology that is not so far away, but certainly demonstrates the issue involved that you're referencing, that those communications need to be secure, and we need to know both on the transmitting and receiving end, they're from partners we recognize.
I guess I'm out of time. I yield back.
Chair recognizes Ms. Gonzalez Colon for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question will be to Mr. Larry Grossman. And the question will be, I just want to bring to attention that the FAA decision to utilize Section 804 to consolidate air traffic control operations in Miami for the Caribbean basin, which includes Puerto Rico. And our airports operate, San Juan airports operate with the 1970s technology. Yet the San Juan Flight Center handles more than 4,000 flights monthly, consisting all flights including arrivals, departures, and overflights for Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, the British Virgin Islands, and overflights from South America due to its 400-mile-long airspace, which can take commercial airline an hour to transit through. And this is the same numbers of flights that Atlanta airspace covers from Charlotte to Savannah. So my question will be, while I understand that this has been done to consolidate operations and for cost savings, my concern is that what are the assurances that a cyber attack on the FAA facilities in Miami won't affect air traffic control operations in Puerto Rico? And what type of redundancies are put in place for smaller airports in rural and remote places should a larger air traffic control operations be affected by a cyber attack, considering that we got the international airport, but as well small airports around the island?
Well, thank you very much for your question. I'm not, as I'm sure you know, I'm not responsible specifically for facilities consolidation, but from a cyber perspective, the protections that our air traffic control systems have are virtually identical, whether there is a facility is local or whether it's remote and managed through our secure communication protocols, which is a service that we obtain. But that service is the same whether the facility is, you're dealing with a local facility or a remote facility. The security parameters are the same.
Mr. Grossman, you've been talking about aviation ecosystem, and with this concept in mind, what kind of training do airport and air traffic control workers get on cybersecurity?
I can't speak for airport workers that are not, specifically employees or our contractors, but I can tell you that all air traffic controllers are required to take yearly security awareness training, and as are all our contract employees, contract tower employees, etc. Employees with sorry.
We after the first hearing we got in this topic, some employees last month in the hearing said that they were conducting personal business on work computers or even personal cell phones that exposed the companies they worked for to cyber attacks. How can we ensure that the same does not happen at airports around the country or while airplanes are in the sky?
Well, I can assure you that that there is no personal business done on any mission critical system or service. Individuals government issued workstation that they get their email on. They are permitted to do limited personal use, and that is very limited. If someone needed to on their break time log into the bank or something like that.
Thank you. Mr. Dorsey, if you mind, how often does DOT test its security controls as part of the risk management issues the OAG identify in 2021, and what does those testings include? And if we do have any operating agency experience a full cyber attack with different types of attacks?
Thank you for the question, Congresswoman. We assess the department's areas in testing cybersecurity controls based on the NIST cybersecurity framework in 5 different areas. We determine whether or not the department is adequately testing security controls centered around identifying and managing risk, protecting its IT systems from a configuration management standpoint, from a identity access and management standpoint.
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
I'll be happy to provide you with an updated response on the record.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Mr. Carbajal for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The shortcomings in our nation's cybersecurity readiness are apparent, both in the public and the private sectors, as evidenced by the cyber attacks this year, including on the Colonial Pipeline and JBS Foods. We cannot leave ourselves vulnerable enough to allow bad actors to control essential infrastructure, such as energy supply, water management, supply chains, and public transit. Mr. Dorsey, as you noted in your testimony, your office has identified information security as a top management challenge in the Department of Transportation. But yet, the DOT has not resolved dozens of open recommendations by your office in the last year. In the report done by Clifton Larson Allen LLP, released in October of this year, they concluded that the DOT must develop and communicate an organization-wide supply chain risk management strategy and implementation plan to guide and govern supply chain risks. What do you see as barriers to this recommendation being implemented? And given the supply chain issues we are currently experiencing, how urgently can the Department of Transportation act on this recommendation to avoid future disruptions? I think you need to get unmuted.
Sorry. Thank you for the question, Congressman. As noted in my testimony, I noted 3 key areas that the department needs to take immediate steps to address their cybersecurity issues that we've identified over the years. Similar to addressing supply chain risk management issues, this applies to all of the cybersecurity issues associated with the department. And what the department needs to do from the start is solidify its leadership at the department's Chief Information Security Office level to ensure that working with the current and new Chief Information Officer, that they establish the right type of framework and controls to ensure the enforcement of the various recommendations that we've made over the years. The second thing that the department needs to do is to develop a comprehensive DOT-wide cybersecurity strategy to address our recurring weaknesses. Until they do so, which we've made a recommendation, we've made an overarching recommendation this year, and to the department's credit, they agreed to implement that particular recommendation. Once they do that and they meet the intent of the recommendation, then I think that will go a long way with addressing some of the concerns regarding supply chain risk management. And the last thing the department needs to do is to ensure they put the proper controls in place to protect and secure its IT infrastructure. And with regards to supply chain risk management, that's a key area that we focused on during our enterprise level review this year, and we'll continue to report out on that as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Newhouse, leaving ourselves open to ransomware and other cyber attacks puts people's lives in jeopardy. It's a national security risk and threatens our economy. There needs to be a better communication between the private sector and government to ensure we are prepared for future attacks. In our hearing of November 4th, we heard concerns from industry representatives that reporting mandates would create a flood of information, resulting in pertinent information being lost or skipped over by agencies. What steps are being taken by the TSA to ensure reporting mandates are collecting and processing pertinent information in an effective manner? And two, can you walk me through how TSA takes in reported cyber threats and then processes the data?
Thank you, Congressman. I appreciate that. I'm very proud of the fact that we have continued robust engagement, a lot of engagement with a lot of stakeholders, including those who served on the panel the previous hearing. Particularly just myself in this past week, we've had executive level meetings with senior executives in rail and passenger rail on this very topic. We've received their feedback on what we call our draft security directives, and that better informed our definition of what we were looking for in terms of a reportable cybersecurity incident. We've made it more effective, less broad. So it is an actual or an incident that's reasonably likely to have a devastating impact on any of their systems. So it is also important to note that those reports go to what we call CISA Central. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency has a centralized operations center. Our directives mandate reporting of that information to CISA Central.
Thank you. My time is up. I yield back.
The chair recognizes Ms. Van Dyne for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I want to thank all of you for being with us this morning. My district is home to Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, which is also the largest economic driver in the state of Texas and one of the nation's most important airline hubs. Over Thanksgiving weekend, we saw passenger numbers exceed 90% of pre-pandemic volume throughout the country. DFW Airport is part of a working group with DHS and TSA, and I've heard that they've benefited from transparency and have gained valuable information from working together, while also making positive improvements after TSA conducted a review. Mr. Grossman, many of our airport critical systems, such as radar systems, are hosted by airports around the country. Does the FAA offer collaboration similar to what we've seen with DHS and TSA for airports? And the second question would be, what more can the FAA do to expand current collaboration and increase information sharing with our airports?
Thank you for those questions. I may have you repeat the first one, but I will answer the second one first. We collaborate extensively with airports through our Aviation Cyber Initiative, as well as the Aviation Sector Coordinating Council, which has airport authorities and AIA on, as members. And so our collaboration with airports is pretty rich in substance. We share best practices with airports, and on many occasions when there was a vulnerability identified, I believe on an airport lighting system that was a non-FAA component, we immediately shared that across airport industry. And I would just ask if you could repeat the first question.
So the first question I talked about DHS and TSA and how they have collaborations in a working group that's focused on transparencies and ways to better collaborate. And I didn't know if the question was, does the FAA have a similar working group with airports that the other two do?
Well, we participate with TSA on the airports working group, and so.
Okay. I've got a follow-up question for Mr. Grossman and for Victoria Newhouse. Everything that we have heard from airlines is that in 2022, that could be a record-breaking year in terms of traffic from Europe, Middle East, and South America, given the pent-up demand. So obviously, Omicron can throw a wrench into those plans, but CBP staffing for international arrivals is going to be critical and could be a significant pinch point if they're not prepared. So how is the FAA preparing for further disruptions in the system as we move closer to the busiest travel time of the year?
Well, that's I apologize. That's not a cybersecurity specific question. I believe our staffing numbers are, are not going to be impacted by that.
Okay, so are you expecting further disruptions or no?
I'm not expecting any further disruptions. No.
Okay, so there's no preparations being made then for the increased travel in 2022.
Well, we're staffed for that increased travel. I guess I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm question specifically. Yeah.
Okay.
So
Ms. Newhouse, what is the TSA's plan to ensure checkpoints have proper staffing and wait times are minimized for passengers?
Thank you, Congresswoman. We are leaning forward very heavily. As you may have heard from Administrator Pekoski over this past year, we have worked very hard to hire as many officers as we can. It's a very competitive labor market, but we are also focused on ensuring real-time reporting. We share that with our airline and airport partners daily and sometimes hourly to ensure any sort of issues in the system, whether it is equipment or personnel related, is addressed immediately. Last, we do have our national deployment force that is ready and able to deploy at a moment's notice to support increased operations around the country. We've seen that successfully for major sporting events such as the Super Bowl, spring training. Also, in the event of a natural disaster, we're able to put our personnel in to support air operations while the personnel who are affected on the ground and their families can evacuate safely. Thank you.
I appreciate that. I, again, have gotten lots of calls and questions from folks who are constituents in District 24. They travel a lot, and there's a lot of frustration that they are feeling like the lines are getting much longer, that there's fewer TSA folks working. So I just want to make sure that is a focus that you guys are working on. Thank you very much, and I yield back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Lamb for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses. Mr. Dorsey, I wanted to start with you. I took from your testimony that while there are several sort of technological and purely cybersecurity issues at play here, there seems to be at the foundation kind of a personnel issue of maintaining consistent leadership in the key roles and keeping people in place and bringing people up through the system so that they understand it. And that's very similar to what I've seen on other committees dealing not only with cybersecurity, but also just kind of like talent or technology acquisition and implementation. And so it's not an easy problem to solve. I was just curious if in your work you saw any commonalities about why we were losing people, why we were failing to gain them in the first place, or any suggestions about how we could start to fix the personnel side of this.
Thank you for your question, Congressman. Our assessments don't necessarily review what the workforce related issues are with respect to the department's cybersecurity posture. So I will not be able to provide you with a direct answer. What I will say is that I am very encouraged by the department's current chief information officer and the various discussions that I've had with him regarding the efforts and his plans moving forward with respect to addressing the workforce issues. What our reviews have found is that there has been inconsistency at the top regarding department's leadership from at the chief information officer as well as the chief information security officer. And as I noted in my testimony, over the last year, the department had an acting chief information security officer who said cybersecurity was not his primary role and responsibility. But what I will say is I am encouraged by the conversations that I've had with the current chief information officer, and I look forward to working with him moving forward. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Do any of our agency witnesses want to weigh in on this question? I mean, basically what I'm trying to get at is this is a common problem for us because obviously people with strong cybersecurity management backgrounds are also in very high demand in the private sector. So I don't know if you have any success stories or suggestions you could make to us about trying to put ourselves on a firmer footing here from a personnel perspective. Is that the Mr. Schachter from DOT? You're on mute, it sounds like.
Thank you. Yes, I'd like to respond to that, and thank you for the question. it gives me the opportunity to say that after having noted that improving cybersecurity at DOT is our #1 priority, our second priority is investing in our workforce. And that means investing and helping them develop their careers so that they're not only able to perform at higher levels with their current responsibilities, but they're adequately prepared for future responsibilities. It also includes recruitment and making sure that we hire in the right people with the greatest potential and that we're looking at our own people for future professional opportunities. I'll refer back to my experience as CTO and CIO at the New York City Department of Transportation, where I served for 13 years. And in that role, we were able to achieve very low levels of attrition due to a robust training program that invested in our staff, made them part of the agency's strategic mission where they felt ownership and empowered. And even though the private sector often came calling with higher salaries, we lost relatively few people. And I understand from industry information, that's a frequent problem, not only for the government, but even private sector companies losing staff to one another as each tries to outdo the others for the best food or health club, in addition to just cash compensation. And the government's also often at a disadvantage when trying to compete in that arena. So I think what we can do, though, is we play to our strengths, which is the importance of our mission, the opportunity for people to make a contribution to improving, and now in this environment, the United States. And I believe that we'll have a compelling story to tell that will both attract good new people as well as help us keep the good ones that we already have.
I agree. We have to appeal to their patriotism, and I hope if there's a way that we can help any of your agencies do that, you will let us know because we know how important it is. Thank you for your participation. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Chair recognizes Ms. Steele for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Graves, for holding this important hearing. During my tenure serving as Orange County Supervisor and Board of Directors for Orange County Transportation Authority, there was a cyber attack on the OCTA. Hackers froze some of OCTA computer systems for 2 days and demanded ransom to unfreeze them. We did not pay the ransom and chose to ignore the demand. And we had staff restored all infected servers. So we are very lucky about it. So I want to ask Ms. Newhouse that are there ways federal agencies can improve communication with the state and local government to best protect against these cyber attacks? And do you think the United States has the proper workforce to fight these current and future threats? These threats are coming in from sometimes China, sometimes North Korea. So do you have that?
Thank you, Congresswoman. And we're very proud of our relationships with our both federal, state, and local partners, many of whom operate critical transportation assets throughout the country. We have a very robust field operation now in place that focuses solely on surface operations. That's one resource that's available 24/7. Each region of our country, we've divided it up into 6 regions and has a responsible executive, an entire team of personnel ready to go to engage one-on-one. But you are absolutely hit it on the nail. That continued collaboration and dissemination of information, it could be anonymized, but it is important that we continue to provide both threat and indicator information to all operators, whether they are state or local or private. And we've established a number of mechanisms to do that. Through our directives, we are also looking for incoming reporting, so that way we can filter that and make sure it gets sent out, anonymized, and work through CISA and CISA Central to make sure those reports are getting disseminated in a very timely manner. Our TSA Operations Center also serves that, I would call it a redundancy. Third, we do have what I think are pretty unique information sharing cells within the United States government. We actually have groups of individuals, both for surface transportation and aviation, that can actually participate in daily threat briefings with the TSA. They can do it remotely from their locations. And that's another opportunity where we, again, provide that persistent information, both indicators, threat, and tools. We do also have, you point out that the nation state actors, CISA's security bulletins as just recently as last week was issued, referencing a nation state actor. That's where TSA, the DHS enterprise works very closely with our U.S. intelligence community. We rely closely and heavily on their intelligence and assessments, along with our Federal Bureau of Investigation and other law enforcement entities. We do have the workforce in place in the United States government. I have a background in intelligence operations myself, and I can say with personal knowledge that we do have direct access to that intelligence and law enforcement information.
Thank you very much for your detailed answer. Admiral, I have a question that, protecting against cyber threats is really critical for the Port of Long Beach and LA. Right now, we have a supply chain crisis, as is we have about 175 ships are waiting to unload. So it's very important. So Congress has made several changes to better integrate cybersecurity planning and response. How is the Coast Guard conducting vulnerability assessments of maritime critical infrastructure? Can you describe how Coast Guard builds cyber resilience in the Port of LA and Long Beach to protect this port and others like it from attack?
Congresswoman, the current supply chain crisis really highlights the importance of the MTS to our national economy and to our national security. And it really emphasizes the need to put proper protective measures in place, but then also be able to be resilient in response to attack. We've put together a comprehensive framework as the lead federal maritime regulator across the whole prevention and response framework to make sure that port communities and maritime critical infrastructure are able to prevent attacks, but then are able to respond and be resilient. The Port Security Grant Program is a key program for building resiliency into the ports. Through funding in FY21, we were able to fund 60 projects at about $18 million and provide key ports such as the Port of LA and LB the opportunity to increase their assessments. And I'm happy to follow up with a brief for you, ma'am, afterwards if desired.
Thank you very much, Admiral. I have one more question, but you know what? I'm going to just submit this question. Thank you. My time is up, and I yield back.
That concludes our hearing. I would like to thank each of the witnesses for your testimony today. Your comments have been insightful and helpful. I ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may have been submitted to them in writing. I also ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. The committee stands adjourned.